Hey guys. This is part 6 of What If Naruto Became Hidan. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 19, Interlude 1. Daily life in Yugure no Sato was like that of most other acknowledged shinobi villages. Calm, peaceful, tranquil. Such sentiments pervaded every heart and every mind as the harsh light of the midday sun filtered down through a much-appreciated smattering of cloud cover and a cool meandering breeze blew inland from the nearby coast. Both took the edge off of an otherwise dreaded heatwave, a recent turn in weather that had only today decided to relent. This relief, however brief it may have been, was evidently a cause for celebration as flocks of varying native birds gleefully took flight overhead, singing cheerily in the distance. Even the strays, like the human beggars and the feral cats, left the relative safety of their previous shelters to bask in the relief this new temporarily milder climate offered. Further inwards, at the very heart of Yugure, amidst the labyrinth that was the village's markets, prospective customers also gathered in clusters to take unrepentant advantage of the pleasant turn in weather. Vendors, tradesmen, and peddlers gaily oversaw their various businesses and stalls. Because honestly, the sudden influx of eager paying civilians and even the odd tourist was a truly welcome sight after the previous grueling weeks of scorching heat and unrelenting humidity. In those sorts of conditions, only shinobi ever seemed to regularly seek the services of Yugure's market center. On a day like this, however, finally mild and temperate enough for the regular civilian to enjoy, the shinobi were a decidedly less visible minority amongst the otherwise bustling crowds. Indeed, these skilled individuals rarely bothered to stray from their shadowed alley paths and distant rooftop treks on a busy day like this. All in all, today was a good day. A nice, simple, ordinary day. Because in spite of the sudden rise in flurried activity, the mood was easily read and difficult to disturb. Calm, peaceful, tranquil, not for much longer. Perched atop a carefully chosen patch of slate roofing, a strategic spot that overlooked this most vital center of commerce and enterprise, one lone solitary figure watched on in silent anticipation as the local inhabitants and the odd foreign visitor went about their shopping frenzies. These ignorant people, all of them haggling and chattering and gossiping away without a care in the world. It was almost painful to watch. Yugure, a shinobi village, only not at all like the rumored rampant militarism of Iwa and Kumo, or the vapid isolationism of Suna, Ain, Kusa, and Kiri. This place was more like Konoha with something bordering on an open-doors policy. Only, also, decidedly not. What apparently worked really well for Konoha didn't quite translate here, because even Konoha in its earliest stages had a size and military strength that the comparatively smaller and younger Yugure couldn't hope to compete with at this point in time, which made for some vastly different views on said open-doors policy amongst the inhabitants of these two budding shinobi powers. And yet, for all their purported worries about foreigners and outsiders, none of them, not a single one of these fools, felt it prudent to be cautious of their surroundings. Humph. Hypocrites. Stage check. The figure mumbled to themselves, critically eyeing the milling sycophants below. Soon, the stage was set. All they had to do now was wait patiently and evaluate the final product. To wait, and wait, waiting. Seriously, how long was this going to take before one of these two-faced smiling morons finally dash? Crash, arg, a strangled cry, and the clanging racket that accompanied the distinctive sound, rang out over the surrounding din of productivity. Twin pools of gleaming violet narrowed when the much-anticipated commotion finally occurred, drawing that unwavering gaze to a very specific tangerine stall at the far end of the otherwise hectic street front below. Laid out on her back by the citrus stand was a decrepit elderly woman, her brittle emaciated limbs shaking in the aftermath of her unexpected fall. Lucky for the elderly lady, though, the milling citizens surrounding her downed form were quick to respond. One elegantly groomed young man bent over the elderly local woman and asked after her health. Meanwhile, a scruffy middle-aged vendor from a nearby clothing store rushed over to gingerly help lift the aged senior to her feet. A teenage girl valiantly stepped forward soon after, this time to rescue the elderly woman's previous purchases from the dust-ridden road below. From atop their hidden perch, the figure didn't once let their focus linger on the venerable woman's predicament, nor did they take any particular note of the reactions that may or may not have been evoked by the incident. Instead, the figure firmly set their sights on the source of the outburst. Barely visible to the naked eye, a slack length of wire, no longer held taut, lay innocently by the woman's feet. Trigger, check, and so it begins. Not a moment later, the previously sedate market setting erupted in a fit of sudden turmoil. Bang! Crash! Screech! Bang! It was beautiful. From several well-hidden nooks and crannies situated along the main street, thick billowing plumes of smoke exploded into the panicking crowds below. In seconds, the atmosphere was utterly clogged by the unending plumes of manufactured smog. Following this eradication of sight and easy breathing, intermittent flares of vibrantly hued sparks then proceeded to erupt from other nearby areas left vulnerable to tampering. The staggered burst sent surges of spasming pyrotechnics scattering over the blinded crowds of screaming, panicking consumers. From the safety of the rooftops above, still carefully sequestered away in their secret niche, the figure watched on in avid bemusement as the chaos ensued. By the time their semi-muffled giggles had finally subsided, streams of confetti and random spurts of neon green slime had been added to the tumultuous mixture. The figure was especially interested to note the inclusion of the homemade smoke machines, which were still going strong, even if most of the fireworks, or at least the first round of them, had fizzled out, for now. Calm. Peaceful. Tranquil. Ha! The figure snorted derisively into their palm at the thought. That calloused, spindly hand lazily raised up to their mouth in some vague preemptive attempt to smother such outbursts before the figure could prematurely give their position away. Because as of this moment, the fragile illusion of peace was gone, vanished as though it had never been there to begin with. Now, in the aftermath of that forgotten serenity, only the unadulterated bedlam of another successful opening gambit for the next thrilling round of brats versus goons remained. Truly a transcendent state of beauty to behold. Ignoring that particularly sarcastic remark, and without nary a glance at the culmination of nearly a whole week's worth of diligent planning and preparation, of nearly the equivalent of 3 D-rank mission pay slips and what was rumored to be a particularly spectacular bathroom explosion during the ever-critical experimentation phase, the figure finally slunk away from their hiding spot and disappeared from sight. That isn't to say they stopped watching the show though, because even amidst the veritable cacophony of banging and screeching below, the arrival of several members of Yugure's admittedly small ABNU division was simple to discern. There was then a sharp increase in sound when Bandana Boy failed to get to cover fast enough. Not even a second later though, the additional crackle of lightning echoed, and the previous screaming reached a new crescendo, when Red no doubt swooped in to bail poor Bandana Boy out, no doubt with that same deadpan look of judgment plastered all over his rounded face, just to mess with Bandana Boy and his trampled pride all the more. Now, Girly was giggling girlishly over Bandana Boy's griping, and the next round of strategically placed fireworks were going off, and the ANBU were scrambling like ants amidst the panicking crowds and the confetti, and the smokin'. Game, set and match, check. The figure, Hidan, or rather, Naruto, whispered to himself with an unkind smile. Those brats, they'd done well. Really well. Sort of. And the score? Kurama muttered, anticipation all but thrumming through the entertained Biju's very being. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Naruto finally decided. They were lucky the backup on the tangerine stand worked. They'll have to do better next time. The unspoken or else didn't really need to be said aloud. Kurama could only cackle in glee. Meanwhile, Kamizuki Shiger stared blindly at the complete and utter pandemonium taking place before his lidded cerulean blue gaze. Sir, this is madness. Hisoka Shiro stated angrily. Or at least, Kamizuki assumed that slightest baring of teeth and the minute narrowing of those distinctive green eyes was supposed to be an approximation of anger. It really was nearly impossible to tell with members of that particular clan. They were always so difficult to read, or rather, they were a bunch of constipated emos, if one were to listen to what Hidan had to say on the matter, which brought Kamizuki back to the problem at hand. Hidan. The man was a lot of things. Unfortunately for the aging Kage though, easy to deal with was not one of those things. Case in point? This entire situation, right here. It had only been after the 4th reoccurrence of this particular type of incident since returning from their C-rank mission, turned A-rank, apparently, that Kamizuki had been able to weasel out a label for this latest method of madness. Brats versus goons. Like its predecessors Kanayan the Brat and Dagger the Little Shit to Death, Hidan's latest innovation in a long line of immoral, irresponsible and supremely unethical training exercises had apparently combined 3 of Hidan's favorite pastimes into one unholy trinity of unbridled insanity, deliberate, and potentially lethal, endangerment of his students? Check. Inconveniencing, usually crossing several ever-thinning boundaries into harassment, every kind of assault and the occasional impromptu assassination of Kamizuki's sketchier ANBU operatives? Check. And finally, the creation of a literal metric fuckton of paperwork, thus resulting in more stress and migraines and sleepless nights. And did he mention more godforsaken paperwork for Kamizuki to deal with? Double check. It was as though Hidan possessed some sort of an innate talent or sixth sense for determining new ways to ruin Kamizuki's life, a talent the Hokage suspected Hidan used liberally as revenge for the whole blackmailing him into joining the village in the first place thing. Still, sicking a clear majority of the village's noble clans on him a staggering 11 times in the last month alone, this time with the Shiro clan heir acting as their apparent mouthpiece, should have been considered a bit much as far as revenge went, even by Hidan's usually exhaustive standards. He has such demand that the plebeian responsible for this be thoroughly punished for this outrage. He is a menace, not only to our shinobi but the civilian populace as well. And now you deem it acceptable that the vagrant corrupts our children as well? I refuse to accept tea. Suddenly, the unpleasant droning of Hisoka Shiro's monotone speech was cut off, and then the climate inside Kamizuki's office took a sharp nose-dive from brimming with the boiling anger of the masses to a tentative frigid silence. Not even a moment later, a new voice, clear and even and audibly deadened to all known forms and figments of human emotion, echoed in the wake of that same painfully tangible silence as though it were the dead elephant in the room, so to speak. Such emotional outbursts are unbecoming, my son. That voice intoned, effectively drowning out whatever fervor Hisoka's previous impassioned, for a Shiro, speech had elicited amidst the man's quasi-entourage of council members, clan heads and wealthy civilians. Kamizuki didn't dare lift his head from the smooth, comforting surface of his desk where he'd long since buried himself under the tangle of dreaded paperwork, and his own withered arms and hands. Maybe if he didn't look up and just ignored them all, the angry mob of nobles, including both the Shiro clan heir and now the clan head as well. Perhaps then, if he prayed and wished and clicked his heels and truly believed this time, it would all go away. Hell, if Kamizuki could swing it, he'd take the entire village going up in flames sometime in the next 10 seconds or perhaps even the earth spontaneously swallowing him whole. If that's what it took to get out of dealing with the veritable clusterfuck Hidan had made for him over the course of the last few hours, then by the gods, Kamizuki would take it. Forgive my foolish son's temper, Lord Hokage. It has been a trying day. The cultured tones of Torin Shiro echoed across the eerily silent expanse of Kamizuki's office, only emphasizing how little Kamizuki's continued prayers to the kami truly mattered in the grand scheme of things. Alas, it appeared there would be no wish-granting today. No sudden wildfires or sinkholes or apocalypses would save Kamizuki from this mess. So, taking a deep breath in to settle himself and straightening his shoulders in preparation for the latest installment in a long line of complaint-driven meetings of a lifetime, Kamizuki rose to a more dignified seated position, met the unyielding visage of wizened emerald-hued, dead fish, eyes paired with waist-length pure white locks, and then he breathed out again through his nose. He was as ready as he could be, which was to say, not at all, Lord Shiro, it's been far too long. And by that, Kamizuki meant not fucking long enough. How can I help you in the company you've so kindly brought with you here today? As you are no doubt already aware, Lord Hokage, we are gathered here due to the actions of one of your shinobi, Hidan, was it? You see, and on it went. Kamizuki stared blankly at the Shiro clan head as Torin droned on and on and on and on with various nobles scattered about the room all nodding tentatively at the right times and not daring to say a word in contrast to Torin's. It was complaint after complaint after complaint, with all of the blame placed firmly at Hidan's feet. Little to no responsibility for the day's events was spared for the genin team who'd actually perpetrated the acts these people were so up in arms about, for the shinobi who'd been present at the time and yet failed miserably to competently evacuate the area, for the two ANBU operatives who then proceeded to accidentally harm several gawking civilian bystanders in their attempts to incapacitate the aforementioned genin culprits, for the Hokage who even now had little to no intentions of seriously punishing Hidan for any of this. What could he say? At least nobody died. This time. And oh gods, what the heck was he even doing? By all rights, Hidan should have been executed by now. Or in prison. Or exiled. Something. Anything that wasn't this. Only Hidan hadn't been subjected to any of those things. Kamizuki still wasn't entirely sure why. Certainly, Kamizuki could reluctantly admit that Hidan's unconventional teaching methods, read, child abuse, were yielding results. Unfortunately, those same means were also provocative and controversial and dangerous and had on a second-hand basis led to the unearthing of a whole other slew of issues that Kamizuki really didn't want to think about, let alone actively deal with. Only he had to, because he was the village leader and it fell to him to sort these things out when members of his shinobi forces did something especially reckless or dangerous or insane or potentially even treacherous. When members of his shinobi forces who weren't Hidan were doing things they really weren't supposed to be doing. things that were in a lot of ways more problematic and compromising to the village than Hidan's daily shenanigans could ever be, which meant it essentially fell to Kamizuki to deal with anything at all, to do with Hidan and the veritable political and logistical shitstorms he regularly kicked up as a result. Shit, why our coalition will submit the following recommendations for the discipline of the shinobi, Hidan, for your perusal at a later time. For now, I believe it prudent to review items 1 through 17. Ahem. Page 2 of 57, Article 1, states that the shinobi in question should face official reprimand first for the reckless endangerment of his. Arg, what unforgivable horror had Kamizuki committed in his last life to deserve even a fraction of this? Meanwhile, Yukio tried really hard not to grimace when a body not even half his size suddenly came barreling at him from his right, and only a few scant seconds after he'd tentatively opened the front door of his parents' house and taken that equally as cautious first step inside. It took every shred of self-discipline within Yukio to refrain from lashing out at the otherwise innocuous assault. The accompanying joyful squeal of Yuki, in a shrill young voice, almost managed to relax Yukio's fried nerves, even if some part of his brain was even now screaming, what if I hadn't stopped? And what if I'd killed her? What then? What then? Yukio let go of that little voice's concerns, and the kunai he'd held in a death grip from within his pocket until literally just now, with the same level of determination he'd long since used to ignore any verbalized doubts that had been swung at him over the years about his abilities as a shinobi, or his mother's incredulous denials and attempts to dissuade him since the fateful day he made his desire to become a shinobi known. Speaking of disapproving parents though, Yukio Sano! Is that you? Oh boy. That didn't sound too good. Yuki! 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 You're home! Little 5-year-old Junko cheered as Yukio effortlessly plucked the little wide-eyed girl up off of her feet and settled her atop his hip, carefully flitting up the stairs with his precious cargo in tow, and a few telltale winces at the jarring movements her squirming elicited, because those ANBU guys might not have been even half as terrifying as his sensei, but they'd still hit hard. Yukio carefully deposited a giggling, bouncing Junko on her bed just in time before his mother came flying down the hallway with rage utterly plastered across her green slime-splatter-tinged face. Well, it looked like Yukio hadn't just imagined seeing his beloved mother wandering the markets only a few short hours ago. There went his initial plan of deny. And wasn't that just flipping great? It appeared this particular discussion was going to somehow be even worse than previously anticipated. What in the actual hell did you think you were doing out there today, young man? The plump brunette screeched at the very top of her otherwise impressive lungs, her hands flying up in a flutter of movement that only made the still slime-splattered woman look all the more manic and borderline deranged. Do you think this is funny? She literally screamed. Yukio being Yukio only made the entire situation worse when the only thing his brain could think to supply him with in reply was a quiet, yes? Yuki! Yuki! Junko cheered obliviously in the background, apparently content to once again ignore the increasingly unhealthy colors Yukio's mother's face was turning under the green stains from Emmy's patented slime concoction to better redirect her brother's attention back to her. Unfortunately for both Yukio and Junko, Yukio couldn't afford to ignore his mother just yet, not when it looked like she was seconds away from giving herself a stroke, or braining him with her favorite frying pan. So yeah, ignoring was a no-no this time. The last thing Yukio needed right now was his own mother physically trying to attack him in another flare of her infamous bloody temper. I mean, it was training. Yukio desperately tried to amend his previous statement. Unfortunately for Yukio though, the whole unconventional training and my sensei made me do it, or else, excuse only really worked on fellow shinobi who could sympathize. Since Yukio's mother was decidedly not a shinobi, that left Yukio shit out of luck in this regard. Training? Training? At what point does training involve terrorism? The portly middle-aged woman shrieked. Don't think I didn't see those masked ninjas there either, boy. Those were ANBU, Yukio. Boo. You were attacked by the village elite today, all because that man has you doing such stupid, reckless things. Oh, here we go. Yukio thought with an internal eye roll at his mother's propensity for dramatics. It hadn't honestly been that bad. Sure, they'd made a bit of a mess and essentially picked a fight with the ANBU who they knew would be responding to their actions. That was kind of the whole point of Brats vs. Goons. It was also a better outcome than outright failing one of Hidan Sensei's so-called training exercises and facing the consequences. Or worse, waiting around for Hidan to get bored and pick a fight with the ANBU himself. At least this way, Yukio and his team could at least somewhat ensure that Hidan-induced casualties were far less likely to occur. Mom, relax, it's fine. Yukio tried in vain to calm his almost deliriously enraged mother down, The whole village elite myth isn't even accurate anyway. ANBU can be any rank, it's just that they wear different uniforms and have to be all anonymous and stuff. Most of those guys from today were like, at best, a bunch of chunin desk jockeys or something. Besides, Yukio and his teammates hadn't even really been fighting those ANBU, so much as avoiding them with an odd counterattack thrown in for flavor, which was a totally different scenario in Yukio's opinion. Also, while Yukio's own rank of genin shouldn't have made that particular argument all that comforting either, when taking into account that his other options for regular in-village training included either fighting his own teammates, who he couldn't fight all the time for obvious reasons, or fighting his sensei, who usually made the ANBU from today look like a bunch of fresh genin by comparison anyway. Well, it's safe to say that Yukio felt that his defense of his own actions today was adequate. Once again though, his mother failed to see the logic of Yukio's argument. That isn't the point. You and your little friends are ruining yourselves, and for what? I highly doubt causing such a ruckus for normal people is going to help you be a better killer. Mum, not in front of Junko, Yukio wanted to plead, overly conscious of the youthful dark eyes even then still boring into his back in ignorant innocence. Only, he didn't bother speaking again, already knowing by the specific shade of peers she just turned that his mother wasn't listening anymore. I knew I never should have went along with this stupid idea of yours. Become a shinobi. Ha! I should have made you accept that apprenticeship under your uncle instead and been done with it. But no, I had to make the mistake of listening to your idiot father, and his inane let him follow his dreams nonsense. You could have been somebody respectable, Yukio. You could have been a blacksmith or a merchant or an accountant. Instead, you wanted to be a murderer, and now you're even being taught by that fiend, Hidan. I've heard the rumors, you know. Don't think I haven't. They say he's a menace to our society. Even for a shinobi, he should have been forced out of the village long ago. What with what Mrs. Washahi. Without another word, Yukio strode forward and slammed his baby sister's bedroom door shut. Before his enraged mother could think past her own reignited rage enough to reopen the thin wooden barrier and restart her tirade anew though, Yukio had flitted back to little Junko's side and begun gently tickling her tiny cherry blossom kimono-clad tummy. You want to go on an adventure with Yuki, princess? Yukio asked, only to receive another wide grin. The gap her recently lost tooth had left vacant, making her look all the more adorable, while her small pudgy hands compulsively clapped in response to his proposal. You mean it? Yes. Yuki! Yes. She chanted, Adventure! Adventure! Grinning back at the giggling bundle of joy, Yukio near effortlessly slung his darling little sister up onto his back again and bounded from the window, just as the screeching from behind them increased significantly in volume with the reopening of Junko's door. Before his mother could properly step into the room to try and stop them though, Yukio was already bounding across the neighbors' roofs with his contagiously happy sister clinging to and tugging at his bandana from her perch atop his shoulders again. They'd go to a park somewhere for a few hours and play. Hopefully by dark, Yukio's father would have returned home from his and their uncle's forge to placate their mother's fury some. Until then, avoidance was key. Well, that and a stop at the local ice cream parlor. Maybe another late-night sugar high would teach his mother to look down on Yukio's dream and insult his sensei like that again. Meanwhile, Nanisher nodded solemnly in response to Emi's quiet farewell before his only female teammate disappeared inside a plain middle-class-looking house, situated beside the home he knew to be her own. Unwilling to indulge his own passing curiosity about such an act at the cost of his teammates' privacy, and risk ruining the same courtesy said teammates had so far afforded him, Nanisher spun on his heels without another thought on the matter, and began his own trek further north towards the Shiro clan compound. They'd already long since separated from Yukio back at Training Ground 9, considering the dark-haired boy's family resided amidst the poorer civilian districts in the southeasterly sectors of the village. Though Nanisher vaguely remembered the dead last mentioning that his father was some sort of tradesman. No matter. Nanisher had more worrisome things to ponder than his teammates' home lives, said things being his own home life, ironically enough, already cringing in preparation for the lectures, the disappointment, the insults, the punishments. Nanisher was in no way, shape, or form prepared for the leering face that greeted him upon sluggishly entering the mansion that had for generations served as the Shiro clan head's personal residence, his grandfather's house where Nanisher and his own father also resided. Well, little cousin. What manner of mischief have you and your little team caused uncle and grandfather this time? Nanashi's bespectacled cousin, Junichi, hung from where the young man had so precariously plastered his languidly reclined body atop a particularly plush pillow usually found elsewhere inside the opulent mansion, with the same carefully groomed head of silken pure white hair that only real Shiro clan members sported, his own cut comparatively short and currently unbound so that the ends curled near his shoulders. Nanisher felt pinned under the brimming expectations visible in Junichi's sly acid-green eyes. Only, these were an entirely different set of expectations from those imposed upon the diminutive redhead by both his stoic father and inscrutable grandfather alike. No, with Junichi, who had always outwardly claimed to crave entertainment above anything else in this life, even the approval of his family, the prestige of the clan, or the reputation his skill as a shinobi had already garnered Junichi in his as of yet short career. These expectations elicited a resoundingly different sensation to the others that Nanisher often found himself buried under. As such, unfortunately, Nanisher still even now couldn't be certain what exactly Junichi expected of him. As a matter of fact, it was Junichi's deliberate denial of all the things Nanisher himself wanted in life that always left Nanisher reeling whenever he had the misfortune of dealing with his older cousin, which was probably why it was always so stressful whenever he was forced to interact with the meddlesome man. It was also why Nanisher didn't even bother second-guessing his reflexive response to his quirky cousin's broad opening gambit. "Of what am I being accused of this time, cousin?" Nanisher fired back in his preferred deadpan tones, making certain he kept not only his voice perfectly level but also every minuscule inch of his expression blank too. When it came to Junichi, one could never assume to have the upper hand. Ever. Because while Junichi had long since abandoned their clan's preferred manner of stoicism and absolute control over the self, Junichi had mastered the subsequently prized skill of reading others' emotions and using that information for his own gain on the knee of their shared grandfather, Torin Shiro, himself. Moreover, Junichi had since taken that skill and turned it into a weapon, one which Junichi had never once failed to wield with deadly precision against anyone and everyone around him at any given opportunity. With Junichi, nobody was safe from precarious political maneuvering and verbal onslaught, Nanisher included, and as far as Nanisher could tell, it was all in the name of Junichi's own twisted sense of humor. It really was no wonder Yukio's own facetious behavior had always grated at Nanisher so. "Oh, come now, little cousin, why the long face?" "I merely asked a question," Junichi all but purred from across the entryway, his amusement at Nanashi's admittedly poor deflection immediately apparent. "What have you been up to, eh?" he asked once more, this time in a truly delighted tone. Nanisher didn't bother fueling that particular fire with an answer of any kind. Junichi already knew what had happened, as evidenced by Nanashi's father and grandfather's present absence. They were no doubt out already dealing with the social and political fallout of Team Kick-Ass actions, or so Nanisher assumed. In any case, saying anything more now would only risk incriminating Nanisher more than he already had been. So, with what little dignity he had remaining, Nanisher stalked past his older cousin and his now frequent pointed, and far too telling, "I told you so" looks. He didn't want to hear about how Junichi had been right about the value of his becoming a genin, about how the clan and the family would react to his going away on missions now. Right about who and what his sensei turned out to be and how the clan, his family, had taken it. Instead, Nanisher prowled past the parlor, the sitting room, the kitchens, the dining room, the gardens, the armory, the training rooms, the offices, the library, the family quarters, the guest quarters, and even the servants' quarters until finally, he made it to his own bedroom. Laying down on his bed, still fully clothed and filthy from the beat-down disguised as training that had followed his team's glorified prank earlier today, Nanisher closed his eyes and tried to rest. If Junichi was here to babysit him personally instead of simply leaving him with the maids and the servants, then Nanisher was going to need all the energy he could get once his father returned home. Or in other words, just another ordinary day for Nanisher then. Until one day, when Nanisher was finally strong enough, he'd change it all. He'd earn back his name and the respect due to him. He'd rebuild his clan's honor and finally be free of the cursed stigma that had plagued him for every waking moment since that fateful day. Then, nothing, not his father's disappointment, or his grandfather's indifference, or his cousin's manipulations, or the rest of what remained of their clan's sneers and derisiveness. Finally, none of it would matter then. None of it. Chapter 20. Previously. Dashing forward as a single cohesive unit, Emi, Yukio and Nanisher raised their respective weapons in preparation for the first real fight they've had since their arrival in Konoha. And if they were all grinning and laughing and smirking in their own individual approximation of a decidedly psychotic manner, almost like Hidan sensei in that regard, well, to Emi's mind, there wasn't anything particularly wrong with that. An undeterminable time later, blearily, Yukio blinked up and up and up at a jagged ceiling of tangled vines, damp blanketed moss and twisting tree roots. Wait, that's no. Oh shit. Crap. Ouch. Seriously, oh merciless demons above and below, Or maybe he was thinking of Hidan, his throbbing head, that freaking hurt, damn it. Shit. That whole moving thing needed to come with a warning label or something, because trying to sit up just now. That had been hell, sort of. Kind of. Okay, so maybe he was exaggerating a bit. If this really was hell, then Hidan would be popping up any minute now with a brand new training exercise in mind. And he'd be pissed off. And sleep deprived. And ranting about stupid shit, like the hidden misjutsu or corny monologue ing or ramen or Deus Ex Machina style dojutsu, or something. And then he'd, arg. No, don't think about it. Don't think about it. Or better yet, don't jinx it. Or so Yukio tried to tell himself, breathing in and out, slowly, gently, cautiously, tilting his head ever so slightly to the side to further inspect his surroundings. Yukio curiously found himself staring blearily at a vaguely humanoid shape just near the foot of his makeshift grass bed. What Ash? Yukio barely managed to mumble to himself, before his sleepily bewildered confusion gave way to sudden and extreme panic-ridden alarm. That wasn't Emi or the bastard extraordinaire. Fuck it, that wasn't even Hidan-sensei, even if some, possibly masochistic, part of Yukio might have preferred it to be, which, even though the figure curled up by the panic boy's feet wasn't Hidan, truly a great relief, the more rational side of Yukio assured. The fact that someone so utterly unfamiliar was so close to him, while he was in such a vulnerable position, felt all kinds of wrong. Honestly, Yukio should not have to deal with strangers sitting creepily at his bedside. Ever. And that guy there? That right there was the epitome of a creepy stranger if ever there was one, with a slight and decidedly short frame defined by cherubic, and yet distinctly boyish, features. The strange shinobi's mud-coated, dirt-smeared brown hair was short, spiky and coarse, while those wide bug-like eyes stared with soul-sucking intensity into Yukio's own. Worse still was the Hittite wrapped firmly around the gormless worm's forehead. The Konoha's leaf symbol was embossed proudly upon the metallic surface, once again leaving Yukio with little to no doubt that something seriously wrong was going on here. Why was a Konoha boy sitting by his feet, presumably watching Yukio's unconscious form like some sort of a pervert, or a creepy stalker fanboy or something? Had Yukio been captured? Or was it the other way around? Was this blank-faced, empty-eyed, dopey-looking loser somehow Emi and Inashi's, and therefore, by default, Yukio's prisoner? Because that last theory didn't really ring true either. As a general rule, Team Kick-Ass didn't do the whole taking prisoners thing. At least, not alive anyway. This was primarily because their sensei had a nasty habit of either intentionally and or unintentionally reacting to just about every situation with lethal and or traumatizing demonstrations of force, even in the scenarios when killing wasn't recommended, necessary, or even really at all feasible. So, having now established the unlikelihood of his team using some unknown Konoha brat as a hostage or something, again, what was this particular turd stain doing here? And also, just while they were on the subject, where was here Yukio? The still baffled genin in question tore his usually limited attention away from the crouching creep of a Konoha brat and towards the source of that all too familiar voice until, yep, there she was. Emi sat cross-legged at the far end of what appeared to be the hollowed-out center of some sort of gargantuan tree. Beside her, a small but easily hidden fire was carefully tucked away just out of Yukio's view, and yet far enough away from the apparent entrance so as to reduce the risk of garnering any unwanted attention from the outside. Sitting there like that, shoulders slumped, shoulder-length leaf-strewn chocolate-brown hair in disarray, and her two heavily bandaged hands settled just a little too tentatively atop her knees, even with that gentle smile on her face, only emphasizing the scar crinkling slightly along the length of her left cheek. She just looked so tired. Emi, Yukio. Emi breathed in obvious relief. You're finally Awa. Who the fuck is that loser? Yukio found himself blurting out before he could consciously stop himself, one aching and evidently bandaged arm of his own rising to make a series of pointed, and coincidentally rude, hand gestures at the still staring, still very much creepy Konoha boy who sat by Yukio's feet with his knobby knees tucked up against his chest. At this reaction, Emi only tilted her head in confusion, blinking those wide doe eyes just a tad bit too innocently, once, twice, thrice. Who? Nope. They weren't doing this right now. Nope. No way, no how. Don't you fool me, Emi. I mean that dorky-looking fucker right there. Yukio hissed, still pointing, even going so far as to violently jab his only uninjured pointer finger a couple of times at the end of his sentence, just to further emphasize the point. The one currently glaring daggers at me in between making moon eyes at you. He shook and twitched, because the creepy little shit was doing that too, now that Yukio took the time to glance over and study the loser's behavior just a little. Periodically, those beady soulless eyes would flicker over to Emmy and soften and warm, and it was absolutely disgusting. Yukio wasn't going to stand for it. Oh, you mean him, right? I don't know who he is. Emmy shrugged with the tiniest little smile, almost nonchalant, and for a moment Yukio faltered. You don't know, he whispered, his outstretched hands slowly lowering back to his lap. Yes, that's right. Emmy nodded, her smile never once faltering. For a few long moments, Yukio couldn't speak. He was too busy taking in every twitch of his teammates' smiling lips, every shy glance at the Konoha kid, every shrug, every fidget, every shift. Shit, then why in the metaphorical fuck is he here? Yukio suddenly found himself crying out, his head still throbbing and his mind now in sudden terminal distress. Here he was, stuck in a hollowed-out tree fort or some shit, left to deal with the headache to end all headaches, and a creepy beady-eyed lover boy from Konoha somehow mooching off the last surviving shreds of whatever the hell Emmy was passing off as goodwill right now. And then Emmy herself, who couldn't seem to see a problem with any of it at all. Fuck, what the hell was even going on right now? Was this some kind of a kooky dream? A hallucination? A punishment? Maybe he'd been caught in a genjutsu or dash, because he showed up and helped us when that white-haired girl went ballistic back there? Emmy finally admitted, though it sounded more like a question than an explanation in, wait, white-haired girl? Ballistic? Oh, foo dash, shit. Fuck. Right. Yukio found himself groaning quietly under his breath, eyes shutting just as his head dropped forward to rest in his own already waiting hands. Deep breaths, Yukio, deep breaths. He tried to tell himself, you can handle this. Arg. How in the fuck had he actually managed to forget about that particular freak of nature? And better still, could he somehow manage to forget again? Because there was crazy, and then there was crazy, and then there was Hidan levels of crazy. And that girl with the white hair, Maiko or whatever she'd been called, whoever she was, whatever she'd been, well, it was safe to say that she'd been absolutely, positively, 100%, without a doubt, not quite sensei-level crazy, but it was getting there. Yukio verbally decided, his quiet mumbling only somewhat muffled by his hands. What the hands currently covering his battered face couldn't stop, though, were the memories that were currently resurfacing. They just couldn't quite keep realization after realization from entrenching themselves deep in his psyche and never letting go. Arg. No wonder I feel like I went a few rounds with Sensei. Though, if he was going to be honest about it, the state of his current injuries felt more like the aftermath of a beating from Hidan in one of his nicer moods. So, all things considered, he'd been more messed up after training before during the last month or so than from whatever that Maiko chick and her screwy teammates had managed to do to him in that clearing. Yeah, see, that there was a positive at least, kind of, sort of. Then again, Yukio wasn't really in any condition to argue semantics at the moment, not even to himself, so, exactly? Emmy nodded emphatically from her side of their little makeshift hideout. No, what he needed to argue about right now involved a vastly different, admittedly less worrying, topic and required an entirely different strategy to resolve. That still doesn't explain why he's here though. Yukio uttered darkly, finally raising his throbbing head once again to more directly glare back at the soul-sucking Konoha leech who was still, even now, metaphorically hiding behind Emmy like a child hiding behind his mother's skirts. That was the best analogy Yukio could come up with to explain the turd's current uncaring demeanor. Otherwise, if the guy didn't think that he had Emmy's support, and thus her protection, he wouldn't have been nearly so relaxed. Only Yukio also got the vibe that this annoying little prick didn't see Emmy like a mother. Not even a little bit. Apparently he got separated from his team earlier, and just so happened upon us back in the clearing. When he got dragged into the fight, it kind of just escalated from that point, you know? And then we ended up grabbing you and running after the white-haired girl went crazy, and that Fumio guy got a lucky hit in and knocked you out. After all of that, this poor sweetheart, he just followed us. And now he's here. Emmy concluded with a look on her face that just bordered on ditzy, an expression Yukio had never seen his only female teammate make before. And also, sweetheart? Oh, sweet buggering fuck, and oh, his name? Yukio just barely managed to choke out, I don't know. Emmy reiterated with another smile and a careless shrug, still behaving far too nonchalantly about the whole thing. Whenever I try to ask him, he goes all red and stares at me funny. Suddenly, realization dawned. So, that's what she's playing at. And then Yukio did the only thing he could do. He stared and stared and stared whilst hoping against hope that the shock, and the bile-inducing levels of mental disturbance he was presently experiencing would one day disappear from him. Maybe some more blunt force trauma to the head could help him out. He followed us. goes all red. Stares at me funny. Yukio mentally spluttered. Because seriously, per sweetheart? Oh. Wow. This was just. Wow. Which meant his previous plan of attack wasn't going to work. At all. Okay, new strategy then. What about the bastard? Because, while these days often leaning very firmly towards the dark side whenever the situation demanded it, and transcending well into the realms of Hidan-level evil at her very worst in any case, Emmy still had her occasional fits of blinding empathy and all-encompassing compassion, and even the odd really stupid idea. Thankfully, usually, Yukio could depend on the bastard extraordinaire to be a mean, apathetic little asshole lacking in all basic human decency with absolute consistency. Usually. And in this case, theoretically, Nanashi's unceasing bastardry should actually work in his favor for once, because if Yukio could just get some support from the final third of their team here, maybe he could. He's watching the perimeter, was Emmy's gentle reply, breaking Yukio from his plans. Okay. But did you think maybe he could try asking Mr. Mysterious over there for his name too? Yukio asked, keeping his voice carefully level as he spoke. What he left unsaid was, did Nanasher approve this? He did. Emmy nodded, not suspecting a T. Wait, H. He did? Okay, given the evidence, that was not the response he'd expected. And here Yukio had been hoping that, for one reason or another, Nanasher hadn't been aware of this new addition in their midst, that he could for once rely on the red-headed bastard's general inability to exhibit sympathy or human kindness in any way, shape or form and nip this apparent entire scenario in the bud before things could go really bad. Showed what Yukio knew, well, sort of. I think. Emmy hesitantly tagged on at the end, suddenly all fidgety and twitchy again, and Yukio had to pause, once more ignoring the unrelenting throb of pain stabbing at him from the crown of his head to the back of his neck so as to better focus on the now. What had she said? That she thought that's what Nanasher had said? What the hell did she mean by she thou dash? Oh, he was being all emo again, wasn't he? Yukio sighed, defeated, because damn it, that had been his trump card. Only, apparently Nanasher was in a mood and didn't care about the slimy little creep still staring daggers of silent hate at the side of Yukio's head, in between the shy glances sent across to Emmy of course, as though she were something wholly rare and sweet and special, and not also sadistic and opportunistic and distinctly shinobi after so many months spent with an oftentimes literal psychopath like Hidan as a sensei, and thus an ill-suited role model figure. In any case, Emmy could boss them about all she liked on the field because Yukio, and even Nanasher could acknowledge that she was good at it. She was a natural leader, and she kept them in line really well. But when it came to these sorts of decisions, the ones that affected more than a single direct factor or action or plan or mission, when the decision to so much as let this unknown kid hang around their camp, even if he was supposedly harmless, could lead them into a trap or set them up to fail later, that was when popular vote tended to sway the last unagreeable sucker who wasn't getting with the program. And in the few rare instances that Emmy just so happened to be that sucker, it was only that combination of logic, peer pressure and perhaps even the shock of witnessing Yukio and Nanasher willing agree on anything without Emmy's coaxing. It was usually that which typically tipped the scales in their favor. Without Nanashi's support in the here and now though, Emmy was going to systematically crush Yukio's thoughts on the matter, just because Loverboy over there had miraculously managed to trigger some dormant maternal instinct with his boyish looks or seduced a half-dead sense of pity with his dead fish eyes. Or maybe he just provoked that opportunistic inner predator with his blushing or something. Honestly, who knew with Emmy? Yup. The ruthless predator in question quietly chirped in confirmation, apparently oblivious to Yukio's inner conundrum, because even Yukio could see the way the tides had turned. Now wasn't the time to try and outstubborn Emmy. Actually, there probably wasn't any time when it'd be smart to try and outstubborn Emmy, but now, when Emmy was like that, the same fact held true even more so. What to do? Oh, for fuck's sake. Oh, you. Yes, you right there. Yukio called, eyes locked firmly on the beady-eyed fucker who was once again making moon eyes at Emmy from across the length of the small cave they'd apparently taken shelter in. When the turd's attention snapped away from Emmy and back to Yukio, and oh look, the kitten glower was back. Yukio, blunt as could be, asked the first thing he wanted to know, what's your name? Okay, let's try this again. What is your name? Yukio asked, slower and clearer this time, as though talking to a small child. And nothing again. Well, if a few nervous glances at Emmy smiling and nodding supportively at the turd meant nothing. Okay, time for a different approach then. I'm Yukio. This is Emmy. And you are. Righto then. Okay, it's official. I do not like this freak. At all. Yukio doubled down when the little shit refused to budge, to make even a sound, to do anything but stare back defiantly, as if daring Yukio to try something. And damn if he wasn't tempted. Turning back to face Emi again, Yukio decided to act on temptation. Maybe if he asked really nicely, "Hey Emi, can I kill him?" "What? No, you can't. He helped save your life. You aren't killing him," Emi exclaimed, utterly scandalized. Yukio narrowed his eyes slightly at the particulars of that particular response, before he found himself whining back at her. But Emi, no, boo, no, fine. He frowned, his jaw ticking slightly in frustration, but he put so much as a toe out of line and we'll feed him to Nanisher, or something. Emi didn't even dignify that one with a response. Instead, she turned her attention over to Loverboy and gave him a too sweet, too saccharine smile. The sight alone sent shivers down Yukio's spine. Don't listen to him, okay? It's just the concussion talking. And oh, but that poor, ignorant little bug fell for it hook, line and sinker. Starry-eyed, a blotchy red blush rising in his cheeks, Yukio turned his knowing gaze back to Emi and went back to default. No, Emi, shut up. It isn't. What is she planning? Naruto blinked. And then, when the scene before him refused to change, he blinked again, and then he blinked again some more. Was that the shrouded man? But why was he here? Again? Didn't they just do this a couple of days ago? Hadn't they already had their macho mano a mano showdown and left it at that? At least, until the next time they inevitably crossed paths on a mission or something and likely, more literally, fought it out to the death. Or whatever it was two upstanding shinobi such as themselves were supposed to do when the time came for them to duke out their differences. Arg. Even for thrice-cursed Chunin exam-induced shenanigans, something about this really wasn't adding up. But before Naruto could say much of anything to the shrouded man about his random reappearance, or maybe just question the other shinobi as to what in the ever-loving fuck he thought he was doing dumbly standing there in the middle of Naruto's way like that, the shrouded man had almost immediately turned tail and bolted in the opposite direction, desperately bounding through the streets as if one of the Bijou themselves were nipping at his heels. Because the shrouded man had definitely been feeling desperate just then. In fact, whilst watching the man flee in an uncharacteristic fit of stunned slack-jawed silence, Naruto had still viscerally sensed the echoes of that one incredibly distinctive emotion, intermingled with a metric fuckton of anger and loathing. And wait, was that fear, which had been all but tingling through the shrouded man's veins, which was all wrong. Because that desperate fear hadn't at all been the same, or even similar to the vibe Naruto had gotten the other afternoon when he'd so cordially met up with the shrouded man in the forest on the outskirts of the village that day. Instead, at that point in time, the shrouded man had been practically blasting him with a veritable hurricane of hate, impatience and anger. Because Naruto hadn't been kidding when he'd playfully mentioned just how pissed off the shrouded man had been during their last little meeting. Well, pissed off and so utterly done with Naruto's shit that it almost hadn't been funny. Almost. And then, just a few minutes ago now, back when Naruto could have sworn that the shrouded man had already made his point and resolved to stay out of his way until circumstances forced the masked shinobi's hand, there he'd been, again? Still generally angry and impatient and hateful and all that other rot. Everything had been pretty much the same as before, sort of, except for all of that fear, a primal, borderline instinctive terror. The shrouded man wasn't frightened of something abstract or distantly applicable, like some specific object or event in the future. No, instead, this had been a blinding, deafening, mind-numbing fear, the kind of heart-wrenching, stomach-churning, bladder-bursting fear felt only in the face of something imminent, insurmountable, and inescapable, like an unavoidable and truly gruesome death had been staring him down right in the face. That same fear hadn't been present in the clearing, but it had been just then, right there in the middle of the street. It had emanated from the shrouded man in nearly visible waves, like a cloak or a second shadow, and then almost immediately it had fueled the same strange shinobi's subsequent departure in a way Naruto knew nothing else could have possibly done, which was why that second short face-to-face interaction, if it could even be called that, had left such a mark on the silver-haired shinobi, perhaps more so than even the first threat-filled meeting back in the woods. That kind of fear didn't just pop up out of nowhere, after all. Especially not in a matter of days and hours between one brief confrontation and another. That sort of fear was human at its core, an instinctual and reflexive means of survival, cultivated over the course of millions of years of natural selection and subsequent evolution, or through hours upon hours of personal trauma and suffering. And worse still, Naruto was pretty sure he'd felt that exact cocktail of emotion somewhere else before. Only it hadn't been from the shrouded man, or at least, not the one who'd so eloquently threatened him back in those woods, in any case. While Nanisher wasn't at all impressed by the continued existence of a certain unwanted tagalong, the redhead in question at least had the good sense to read the room, so to speak. That is to say, he'd actually thought better of it before deciding, fuck it, and moving to decapitate the insipid mute after the first instance in which he noticed the Konoha genin following them in the aftermath of their previous half-failed confrontation with that weird fucking Miss Demon. Well, more to the point, he most certainly wouldn't have attempted a second or third beheading in the middle of an ambush, nor while in the general vicinity of an on-edge Emmy. Yukio though? Not so much. This is all his fault. Yukio screeched at his highest volume yet after his third admittedly half-hearted attempt to end the tagalong's life, all the while dodging yet another barrage of kunai raining down from high up in the trees. No one asked who he was in this context. They all knew, and judging by the wide-eyed puppy dog look the tagalong insisted on sending Emmy's way yet again, even as the Konoha genin in question dodged a fourth half-hearted swipe from Yukio's own kunai-filled hand. It was telling when even the he in question didn't need to be told. Oh, shut up, you can't know that. Emmy huffed while sweeping past another barrage from their cowardly attacker's left flank that even now remained hidden in the trees. Sending yet another dark look at Yukio, her snap subsequent, and stop that, was lost to the rumbling crackle of some sort of lightning-based jutsu being fired up from somewhere behind them all. All four of them wordlessly shot forward further into the flying embrace of kunai, and now waves of shuriken and senbon needles to better avoid the elemental technique. Emmy had already spun to raise an earth wall to cover their backs just as Yukio literally screamed his next words. This is the fourth time in 3 hours. And I say it's all his fault, damn it. The bandana-clad boy shrieked and snarled at the tagalong, and Nanisher had to restrain himself from verbally agreeing for once. Baseless accusations and coincidences were one thing, but, in this isolated instance, correlation was definitely working in Yukio's favor, and it did not look good for the tagalong. It's no one's fault. Emmy insisted once more upon turning away from her still erected earth wall, having apparently counteracted the effects of the enemy jutsu using the inherent interrelationships of the elements themselves, and Nanisher had to wonder how far she was actually willing to take this particular gamble of hers. Now keep dodging, the lone girl added as a whole new wave of bladed weapons was ready to at any moment rain down upon them like hail in a thunderstorm. But he dash, you'd better keep dodging or so help me God dash. Emmy shouted, a darker tone slowly creeping just around the edges, until finally, after mulishly parrying a stray kunai with one of his own, Yukio conceded defeat. For now, fine. And while Emmy was busy doing everything short of physically restraining their teammate to keep him from doing away with the annoyance that was the tag-along despite his words, Nanisher took the opportunity afforded to him for what it was. As the next aerial assault was finally initiated, Nanisher made certain to brush past the tag-along in question as he stepped forward to meet this new attack head-on. This time he was intent on finally breaking through the barrage and taking the fight up to the treetops where the cowards who were ambushing them were still hiding. But before he did, don't get too comfortable. Nanisher murmured lowly in the tagalong's ear before leaping into the fray. Honestly, he took absolutely no satisfaction in noting how the tagalong's face strained itself of all color in his peripheral vision. None whatsoever. The fear was back, but Naruto's quarry wasn't visible yet. Would he actually show up? Would he reveal himself? Would this second shrouded man risk being discovered while the other one was still wandering about? Did they even know about each other? Were they working together? What was actually going on here? Because only another day into this new lead in his investigation and Naruto was absolutely certain he'd figured out at least some of the more important facts by now. Like how the shrouded man from the Hokage's office and later in the woods was not in fact the same shinobi he'd met in the street just 2 days thereafter. That is to say, he wasn't the same shinobi Naruto had sort of sensed following him from the future site of Ichiraku Ramen, only for the man to run away just as fast as he had during that second failed confrontation, just before the first shrouded man had shown up at the other end of the street and distracted Naruto from wandering. Ha! Failed confrontation. Because that's kept occurring on that front too. Repeatedly. Only, Naruto wasn't entirely sure what he'd done to deserve being repeatedly confronted and fled from, besides his office prank gone wrong. Not even Kurama was capable of shedding any light on the subject. Both of them were stumped. Unfortunately, any further investigation would have to wait for now. Once again stalking through Konoha's familiar but still unfamiliar streets with a very particular destination in mind, Naruto forced his mind away from the mysteries of the suspect shrouded men and their equally as confusing motives. Instead, Naruto was focused on a different mission for today because today was the final day of the second exam. It was time to see how his students had handled whatever half-assed scenario Konoha had lumped his brats into this time. Or perhaps, how if the other competitors had had the resolve and fortitude to handle his students at all. It was with a relatively light mood and a skip in his step that Naruto hummed to himself as he walked and ignored the fear and the hate being lobbed at him from some obscure hiding spot situated somewhere above and behind him, probably on a nearby roof or something. He even went so far as to ignore the way the civilians milling about around him were getting increasingly shifty and twitchy and whispery. The way that one Chunin just a few feet in front of Naruto gaped at him. Or was he actually looking at something over Naruto's shoulder or behind him? Naruto couldn't really tell from this angle. Before Naruto could think to ask the other shinobi what the fuck his problem was supposed to be though, the younger man blanched one final time and fled. Seriously, what was it with people running away from him all of a sudden? Before Naruto could think of a sufficiently sarcastic answer for himself though, shit started happening. And as soon as it did, Naruto wanted to ignore the way his senses suddenly spiked, the way the hairs at the back of his neck started standing on end. Really, he did. He had places to be and students to greet, read, torment, and those places and favored Victor, he meant students. Well, either of those things actually involved getting into a brawl with one or more of the shrouded men at the moment. Moreover, Naruto was in a relatively good mood, all things considered, and he wasn't about to ruin that by duking it out in the middle of the street, potentially sparking a panic-screaming mob of stampeding civilians or an international incident or, whatever the actual fuck it was that was apparently happening right now. Unfortunately, life rarely worked out the way people wanted it to, and more importantly, it surely wasn't Shrouded Man 2 standing almost directly behind Naruto at this particular point in time, since Naruto himself could still sense that the same cowardly stranger had yet to abandon his hiding place amongst the rooftops. If anything, the unknown man's fear had only increased. What this could have meant was that the threatening presence, practically marinating in those waves of unbridled fury, maybe it potentially belonged to the far more eloquent, albeit also grumpier and less humorous, Shrouded Man. Only, that didn't seem to fit in with either of the Shrouded Men's modus operandi, which largely consisted of sneaking around being suspicious and covert, or some shit. And correct him if he was wrong here, but Naruto was sort of living under the impression that public confrontations in the middle of the fucking street were not by any definition of the word covert. So, yeah, not the Shrouded Men. Maybe. So, who was the culprit currently standing behind him, making the civilians and the shinobi around them both literally quiver and quake in their sissy little boots? Which in turn only made Naruto twitch as every instinct he possessed screamed at him to turn around already, now, or risk getting hit with something and dealing with the pain. Slowly, casually, having already stopped in his tracks several long moments ago now, Naruto did just that. He turned around. However, it was the sight of the real person standing behind him that had the silver-haired body-snatching time traveler pausing. What? Yeah, this isn't gonna be good, Kurama whispered. But wait, what? Wasn't that Dash? You must be Hidan. Here you go. Emi cheerfully told the as of yet unnamed Konoha genin who, at least in Yukio's humble personal opinion, either needed to stop looking at Emi like that or stop looking in general. The creep didn't need to use his eyes all that much, right? The hypothetical loss of those particular beady little visual organs wouldn't be much for Emi's delicate, convoluted sensibilities, right? Because Yukio would grudgingly admit that trying to take the unknown boy's head might have been asking a bit much the first 17 times. He could still stab the creep in the face though, just a little bit, and not be going too overboard with it, right? Right, we had a few left over. You can take them if you like. Emi continued on, entirely unaware of the present direction of Yukio's thoughts. Or otherwise she'd have already painfully and exasperatedly reprimanded him, of this Yukio was sure, and now she was digging around in her weapons pouch and getting ready to hold something out to the annoying little prick who'd so far refused to say even a word in the presence of any member of Team Kick-Ass. For a moment, perhaps for dramatic effect, Emi's fingers were slowly uncurling and there in her hand outstretched was two incredibly familiar circular metallic objects resting all too innocently in the usually more ruthless Kunoichi's palm. Wait, what? Those were Emi? No! What the heck are you doing? Yukio cried, his body already committed to the motions of diving forward and tackling the girl before Yukio could think much of his actions or Emi herself could just freely hand out the rest of their spare tokens like that. I'm repaying him. Emi replied, far too calm as she nimbly danced away from Yukio, snatched the tokens back to her chest and then held them protectively against the dirted fabric of her now only mostly blue dress. For what? We already clothed him and fed him and let him share our shelter for the last 2 days straight. And we still don't know for sure that he wasn't in on any of the ambushes either. Why in the fuck are we giving him our hard-earned tokens too? Yukio complained. Arg. Not this again, Yukio. Emi huffed, apparently exasperated with his demands once again. Yes. Yes, this again. Yukio shot back indignantly in reply. That flaky little shit is dubious as all get out. I don't know what he's thinking in that stupid-looking head of his, but it can't be anything good. I can see it in those beady little eyes of his. The bandana-clad genin insisted one last time. Yukio, he saved your life. Emi exclaimed. No, he saved you. Yukio corrected her. I was just collateral. I'm not having this discussion again. He's taking those tokens as payment for his help and that's that. Emi declared, a deep frown pulling at her lips and furrowing her brow. Her glare wasn't as cold or acid-filled as it could have been, as it would have been if she was actually invested in this, but Yukio still wasn't willing to risk it. While they were a team, each of them had still been trained by Hidan-sensei, and they were all intrinsically aware of what they and the others were likely capable of as a result of that experience. Shared trauma. Yukio broke eye contact and took 3 steps away from Emi until he was about shoulder to shoulder with an otherwise silent Nanisher. He then made a point of folding his still bandaged-up arms over his chest to show Emi as non-aggressively as possible that, even if he was openly backing down, he wasn't happy about it. Humph! Should have killed the miserable twit when I had the chance. Yukio muttered grouchily to himself, ignoring the way Nanisher shifted at his side in an obvious show of nonverbal solidarity. If Yukio was mentally translating his emo right. What was that? Emi's voice cut through the rare moment of camaraderie. Thankfully, Yukio had gotten a lot faster at thinking on his feet in the last month or so. I said, would it have killed him to say something at least once? Yukio said, trying really hard to make it not sound like a question and only half succeeding in that task. Yukio. Emi growled, doe eyes narrowing. Yukio grit his teeth and looked back at Emi when he spotted the Konoha turd smirking at him from over Emi's shoulder. Almost over. It's almost over. Yukio silently assured himself before uttering his acquiescence aloud. Whatever, he said with a tired huff that was honestly supposed to sound angrier. He can take the damn leftovers. Next time I see him, though, me and the bastard are slitting his throat. Then it really will be bye-bye. You got that, you creepy little munchkin? Yukio called out at the end, meeting those empty black eyes again with a renewed glare of his own and completely ignoring the way Emi immediately puffed up again at the threat. Yukio dash. Emi tried to scold him, only, Nana sure. Later douchebag Yukio said with a laugh and a sarcastic wave of his good hand, please, do visit us again. At this, Nanisher smoothly unsheathed his tanto, and raised a bladed weapon raised threateningly. To complete the picture, Yukio cracked his aching knuckles. Loudly, Emi looked absolutely scandalized. Both of you dash. She started only, thank you, Miss Emi, and then, without another word, the little bug-eyed shit carefully accepted the offered tokens from Emi's still outstretched hand and slipped off into the underbrush. Just like that. Was all of that really necessary? Nanisher asked, finally breaking the ensuing silence. I'm not sure yet, was Emi's reply. Her tone of voice was no longer overly cheerful or long-sufferingly reprimanding though. To Yukio, she just sounded tired again. Well, I sure hope it was worth it. Yukio grumbled under his breath. Only, smack, ow. Emi. Yukio whined, clutching at his poor abused head with a grimace. Arg, what a bastard. They'd see if the redhead found it funny when she did it to him. Now, let's go you two. Emi insisted, already stomping away towards the forest exit with renewed energy, and her head held high. Without another word, Nanisher sheathed his tanto, and Yukio too fell into formation. Finally, things would go back to normal. Even as exhausted as the last few days had left her, Emi could barely contain her excitement. Having only just handed over her team's 3 required tokens to the Chunin assistant who'd been marking down their team and filling out the relevant paperwork on a clipboard whilst leading them away from the forest's hastily erected exit gate, finally, the second stage was over. After separating from the unusual Konoha boy, it had taken them another hour or so of running along the hastily erected fence line to find the correct exit, and another 20 minutes to perform enough reconnaissance so as to assuage Nanashi's paranoia after spotting a prior trap just 100 or so meters back into the forest's murky depths. Emi had barely contained her giggles upon initially witnessing the reactions of that AIM team once the so-called Chunin assistant had released his transformation, Henge, before running off again towards the finish line with several ill-begotten tokens in hand. Only now, Team Kickass didn't have to worry about any of that. Now they were done. After all of the grueling days and stressful nights, after having to guard that Konoha boy near constantly lest Yukio and or Nanisher got one over her and murdered the poor guy. They'd actually done it, and then, finally, the Chunin finished his paperwork and nodded to the trio of genin. Taking this as a dismissing, Emmy had just been about to turn away from the Chunin assistant entirely when she noticed the young man hadn't turned back himself to return to the forest and wait for any more arriving teams, nor had he stashed away Team Kick-Ass tokens as he had presumably done any others either. Was something else going on here? Had they been wrong, even with their precautions? Was this another trap, another ambush? Just another trick? Emmy had been about to open her mouth in protest, to draw one of her last remaining explosive kunai and make the man talk, when suddenly, a weak tugging sensation at her aching hastily bandaged arm tore her attention away from the gaping Chunin still staring off into space and over to her left where Yukio stood. Only, he too wasn't looking at Emmy. No, instead those dark eyes were wide like saucers and planted very firmly on something happening further on in the distance, somewhere opposite the way Emmy was currently facing, the same direction where the Chunin assistant was still, quite coincidentally, even now, compulsively staring. Only, Yukio didn't look excited about their imminent accomplishment anymore, nor was he pouting and whining about her decision to aid and abet the boy from earlier or any variation thereof. Instead, with his round face pale and drawn, his jaw slackened and his mouth gaping, with his tense shoulders and limbs all but trembling with unbridled, unmentionable emotion. "Hey, Emmy," the bandana-clad boy whispered breathily past numb, barely moving lips. "Isn't that?" Before hearing the end of his question, Emmy had already started to turn around, to search intently in the same direction as Yukio, so as to understand what had him and the Chunin, and now that she thought about it, most everyone else present in the little side street, even Nanisher from the looks of things, appearing so visibly shaken. Only, "Oh God, Sensei." Nanisher breathed from his position a little behind and to Emmy's right. Emmy herself barely registered the word, her thoughts consumed only with her own vapid disbelief and then a new dawning sense of unequivocal horror. What the fuck? Emmy found herself screeching at the top of her young lungs, barely cognizant of the way she herself was losing her grip on reality right now as adrenaline suddenly surged and, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, not good, not good. We're gonna die. We're all gonna die." The young girl mentally screamed and bemoaned, too afraid to keep watching but also entirely incapable of tearing her wide-eyed horror-struck gaze away from the total, complete, and utterly unmitigated disaster occurring somewhere off in the nearby distance. Because from their poor vantage point in some residential outskirt of Konoha after they just spent the last several days trudging and fighting and clawing their way through, it was difficult to concentrate enough to see the details of what was happening right now in the village proper. But Emmy, even in her current state of shock and exhaustion, could recognize the most prominent of those particular figures present on some poor bastard's heavily damaged, half-crumbling rooftop only a few hundred meters away. "No, no, no! It's over. We're done for." There he was, Hidan-sensei, menacingly genial and all too gleefully exuberant, standing there in the middle of a partially ruined Kanehigakure no Sado, fighting neck and neck against an angry-looking, red and white-clad, goddamn, mother-freaking Hokage. Shit. Chapter 21. Previously, you must be Hidan. Akino Yamanaka wasn't entirely sure what he'd done to earn this terrible, no good, really horrible day. Nonetheless, he was well and truly sorry. Honestly, because Akino had seen and done and been dragged into a lot of seriously messed up shit in his time. Hell, in his line of work, he'd seen more than his fair share of messed up people too. But this right here? This particular shitfest of a situation seemed to have combined all of the things that made all the previous shit terrible and, just to take what should have been a relaxing period of leave after proctoring the first Chunin exam and ruin it for the rest of forever, transformed this fucking situation, somehow, into a whole new brand of worse. But hey, wait, what was so terrible, some ignorant freaking prick might ask? Well, it had all started with the screeching high-pitched cry of some nameless prepubescent Chunin who'd invaded Akino's home in the middle of the day just to tell him that the Hokage was being attacked, only for it all to devolve even further soon thereafter when Akino finally arrived on scene to personally witness something infinitely worse than what he'd previously been dreading. Because there he was, the first Hokage himself, not being attacked so much as doing the attacking. And his opponent? Well, that particular honor seemed to have fallen to a painfully familiar figure clad in a black cloak and a conical hat, a troubling enough image on its own considering how Akino's instincts had screamed during his own limited interactions with the man during the first phase of the exams. Of course, The present creeping feeling of foreboding elicited by the sight before him now was only further compounded by a new and startling realization just a few painful minutes of careful observation later, that the foreign jonin wasn't so much desperately on the defensive, as he was leisurely dodging Hashirama Senju, and pissing him off even more in the process. Because Hashirama Senju participating in a fight in the middle of the village would have been one thing. A pissed off Hashirama Senju participating in a fight after having possibly instigated said fight, all in the middle of the village? That right there was a whole other realm of fucked up. It was worse, which was actually the other thing that was really bothering Akino as he darted across rooftops and dodged the various shinobi standing sentinel around Ground Zero to view this particular disaster from a different vantage point. What the heck was up with the way Lord Hashirama was fighting? By the conclusion of the scant few minutes it took Akino to dive past yet another gawking shinobi who'd yet to remove themselves after apparently evacuating the civilians, Akino had finally concluded that his drugged theory had potential, as did the possible enemy genjutsu and or nervous breakdown ideas. Honestly, after the shit that went down with Madara and the veritable mountain of stress he'd been under ever since, Akino wouldn't be surprised if this was simply the Hokage's own extreme version of snapping under the pressure. Finally slipping onto the red-shingled roof of some nameless new apartment complex situated east of what would soon no doubt become a disaster zone, the Yamanaka clan had settled into place beside a spiky-haired young woman who looked just about as done with a capital D as Akino felt. Akino, Shikanai nodded in absent greeting, never once taking her eyes off of the disaster occurring atop the roof of the nameless building across the street, one which stood just a little bit shorter than the one the Yamanaka and Nara were both watching from. You witnessed it all, from the beginning, right? What happened? Akino asked, his own pale blue gaze glued to the way the silver-haired man in the conical hat so seamlessly slipped past Hashirama's guard, to then deliver a blow that sent the Hokage careening to the side. Akino flinched when a startled Hashirama lost his balance and went over the edge, only to catch himself on the side of the building and launch himself back onto the roof almost immediately after stabilizing himself. The foreign jonin was saying something now. Only Akino couldn't hear what from this distance, and Hashirama didn't seem to be listening anyway. The resulting battle cry, "Just die," was drained out by the way Shikanai sighed loudly at his side. Didn't see much? Hokage-sama started shouting at one point. Was too busy getting civilians out to hear much. Something about an assassination. Kirigakure was mentioned. Signaled no backup from us. Was tiresome. Is all Akino got out of the perpetually bored and or apathetic woman. Seriously, and people said only the Nara men were afflicted with laziness, as though it were a disease? The truth was, in the rare event that an otherwise motivated Nara woman did inherit the clan's infamous lack of motivation, they were always at least twice as bad as their male counterparts. Always. Well, you're just a fountain of information as usual, aren't you, Shika-chan? Akino grumbled under his breath, eyes still following the deadlock between the Hokage and that other. Now's good, was all Shikanai deigned to say in reply. For once, Akino didn't bother trying to argue for more than that. Considering the direction these two combatants were facing in relation to each other, and Akino and Shikanai's position, how the foreign jonin, what had been his name again, was angling himself to dodge the Hokage's next projected open-palm strike and that neither had resorted to any potentially dangerous ninjutsu yet, this was probably the best shot Akino was going to get before things got really messy. Raising his hand to perform an all-too-familiar set of hand seals, Akino started channeling his chakra and settling his mind into the appropriate state for what was about to come. He'll step backwards, a little to the right next. Aim there, Shikanai muttered. Akino nodded his acknowledgement at the suggestion before finally casting a technique almost singularly unique to his clan. Mind-body switch technique, Shintenshin no Jutsu. Looking back on it now, Naruto still had no legitimate idea as to what in the actual fuck was going on. That wasn't to say Naruto didn't know how it all turned out like this, of course. Even from the get-go, the "how is this happening" part had been the easiest thing to compute. For example, step 1, make sure you have a Naruto when A. Hokage is angry and B. Hokage wants to yell at Naruto for making him angry. See? Easy. But only if he ignored the fiddlier bits, like why is the Hokage angry and why is he angry at me? Because obviously, Naruto already had a handle on the how. He just couldn't think of why. To understand even that much of the present situation though, one had to look back. Back to when, in a distinctly more innocent and peaceful time, read, like 15 minutes ago, Naruto had been minding his own goddamned business for once. Just walking at a casual civilian pace towards his destination with his more distinctive features once again hidden beneath that stupid conical hat, his head down, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his cloak. See? Naruto hadn't been making any trouble. He was being a good little shinobi who may or may not have had a bounty on his head. He'd been keeping a low profile, just as he'd previously been, repeatedly, ordered to do. He wasn't provoking anyone, wasn't instigating anything. He wasn't even hunting for Shrouded Man I or his inexplicably more terrified and stalkerish counterpart, Shrouded Man II. No, today, Naruto was doing what he was supposed to be doing, because today, Naruto was on a mission. Today was the final day of the second exam, as he'd been informed via a rather nervous and rotund courier Chunin who quite simply had to be in a kimchi. Naruto was thus needed at some designated finishing area in the village somewhere where, pass or fail, he was to wait for his student's arrival. That was it. So, that had been where Naruto was going, not looking for trouble in the form of hostile masked shinobi, not tempting fate with another prank that could backfire horribly. Just walking at a leisurely pace towards his destination. As such, Naruto would rather grudgingly admit that he'd been almost entirely blindsided by the sudden arrival of a wild-eyed Hokage. Worse yet, it had been said wild-eyed Hokage who, after confirming that yes, Naruto was this Hidan he'd heard about, had then proceeded to verbally assault the silver-haired Jonin with a veritable arsenal of nonsense about assassins and Kirigakure and not getting away with it. Whatever it was in whichever admittedly bizarre conspiracy the Hokage was increasingly investing himself in as he spoke. From then onwards, things had admittedly gotten worse. Like a lot worse, even despite Naruto's best efforts to remain calm and actually de-escalate the situation for once. Moreover, it's probably better to mention that, perhaps uncharacteristically of him, Naruto hadn't been able to get a word in edgewise over the Hokage's delusional ranting and therefore had yet to actively contribute to either the betterment or worsening of the confrontation. By the time any of the nearby slack-jawed shinobi had stopped gaping long enough to start ushering lingering civilian citizens away from what was surely about to become a disaster zone, the Hokage's petulant ranting had since very rapidly escalated from verbal assault to incoherent screaming without any input from Naruto. And then, after several more stunning minutes of verbal diarrhea, accusations and what Naruto was sure basically amounted to outright abuse, and still with little to no reaction beyond unadulterated shock from Naruto at that point, the obviously deranged individual that was the first Hokage decided to switch tactics, which brought Naruto back to the present. Admittedly elegant and precise blows rained down upon the silver-haired Jonin in a hail of blustering fury. Blows that Naruto was mostly dodging by reflex at this point, because as strange as it may have sounded, despite the fact that it was apparently the legendary first Hokage himself who was at that very moment attempting to brain the silver-haired shinobi with a textbook form axe kick to the side of the head, Naruto's mind wasn't really all that focused on the one-sided grudge match currently playing out before his violet eyes. Instead, only half focused on tuning out Kurama's swear-addled pontificating and purposefully ignoring the still lingering sensations of his own shock, Naruto was busy confusedly scratching his head, literally and metaphorically, between dancing and flipping and skipping and weaving out of the way of his enraged opponent in a seamless combination of practiced kata, natural agility, and his own unique brand of instinctual improvisation. His right hand raised up and over his shoulder to scratch somewhat self-consciously under his conical hat at a spot near that familiar spot near the base of his neck. Naruto managed to avoid most of the infuriated Hokage's blows and tentatively blocked the ones he couldn't, because Naruto's personal experience from his old life may be a bit far removed from the specific details of certain individuals and places and events of the past, of his current present. Nonetheless, he could still remember some of the littler things. One such finer detail had been the origin story of old Grandma Tsunade's superhuman strength, that in developing that aforementioned strength, the slug Sannin had built upon a skill her grandfather, Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, had been known for. The man Naruto was at this present moment half-heartedly avoiding instead of actively fighting, because being an immortal implied by default a certain deterioration of self-preservation skills the longer an individual was, immortal. That being said, Naruto really wasn't in the mood to deal with shattered bones and Naruto-shaped indents in the ground right about now. He wasn't in the mood to be lectured and needled and restricted to D ranks or worse, to deal with the disappointed Kamizuki and the veritable army of arrogant, disapproving clan heads and bitchy, whining councilmen, all likely to be waiting for him once he got back to the village, in the event that he actually fought back right now and succeeded in seriously injuring the first Hokage, which actually brought him to the truly most baffling part about this entire situation. Not the how. Naruto had already mentally analyzed and dissected, and then reanalyzed again the sequence of events that had led him to this very moment, had realized in real time what was happening and tried to react in a manner very uncharacteristic of his current self, of Hidan. because upon finding himself under attack, and immediately recognizing his aggressor, Naruto had momentarily thought to more directly attempt to de-escalate the situation. Sort of. Only, that whole talk-it-out thing he used to do had been a lot harder to initiate this time around than what Naruto remembered from his last life. It was something he hadn't succeeded in accomplishing at all this time, now that he mentioned it. And not because Naruto couldn't seem to shut the Hokage up long enough to say his piece either. No, while the no-talking thing was without a doubt a contributing factor, it turned out that Naruto's once go-to method of reducing hostilities against his village or person or what have you was actually a usually simple feat, made impossible by one singular problem. Naruto still had no fucking idea what the Hokage's problem was. And with that one failing, that one gap in his knowledge and understanding that was even now still bugging the ever-living hell out of him, without knowing why the Hokage was so angry, Naruto couldn't think of one meaningful thing to say to maybe try and stop or redirect the anger, even as he sidestepped another furious swipe from a Hokage who'd been surprisingly reluctant to resort to jutsu so far, probably for the sake of minimizing collateral. They were in the middle of the man's own village after all. But still, yes, the how was well and truly understood. Clearly. The why though? Not even Kurama, for all the Bija's usual wisdom, could shed any useful light on the subject, because this was Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, an honestly legendary shinobi whom Naruto had never personally met, until today. And for some reason or another, that same man wanted Hidan dead. Very, very dead if the magnitude of his anger was anything to go by. And even if the wrathful, righteous anger wasn't enough proof, there wasn't any room to doubt that assumption when the Hokage himself had so explicitly and blatantly stated as such in between the rest of his rambling. Though, admittedly, his execution could use some work. Naruto wasn't exactly an expert or anything, but he was pretty sure the first Hokage was supposed to be stronger than this in shit. I am so sorry! Naruto immediately exclaimed after mindlessly sidestepping another increasingly sloppy blow aimed at a spot that might have been where his head had just been, only to ever so slightly miscalculate his own following attempt to put some much-needed distance between himself and his very angry aggressor. Instead of gliding harmlessly past the Hokage as the same enraged man momentarily disengaged from the latest in a long line of failed taijutsu attacks, Naruto apparently unintentionally fucked up Hashirama Senju's battle flow or whatever. This meant that when Naruto tried to retreat again, the silver-haired Jonin actually ended up driving his right elbow into the side of the now momentarily stunned Hokage's head, thus sending the same man careening to the right. Having not expected the accidental retaliation, the Hokage sort of toppled over the edge of the roof they'd been standing near ever since Naruto's initial attempts to outright flee the conflict before it began had failed. Shit, where was this even going again? Why was this happening? And whose fault was it? Just so Naruto could end them, painfully, as soon as he— Damn it, I really did think he'd be tougher than this. Naruto mumbled quietly to himself, though not quietly enough, apparently, because by then the Hokage had leapt back atop the roof. His already angry brown eyes narrowed even further, and his nostrils flared. How dare you dash? The Hokage hissed, almost sounding coherent for a second there, even as his robe-clad body sunk back into that same battle-ready pose. Huh. Looked like the Hokage was prepared to once again resume hostilities. How fucking wonderful. Unfortunately for the surprisingly bloodthirsty Hokage though, even now, Naruto just wasn't feeling it. Actually, he was too busy imagining all of the shit menial work and administrative hell that Kamizuki was no doubt going to rain down upon him for this fucking mess, regardless of how it was started or finished. Seriously, if Naruto had to waste another minute of his life that could have been spent tormenting his kids or training or eating Nadachirakuzan wishing it was ramen or drinking and gambling with Gamabunta and Kurama, or really, anything at all that wasn't babysitting the Yukage's grown-ass adult fucking son, again. Just one more jashin' damn time, he'd dash. Listen, princess, Naruto began with a sigh, even going so far as to lower his hand from the back of his neck to gesture appeasingly at the still bristling first Hokage. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I honestly have no fucking clue what your problem is. So maybe, if we could just tone things down a notch and calm the fuck down, maybe, we see a just die. Right, so back to square one then. Good to know. Naruto ducked under the next wild overextended swing that almost looked like it was going to hit him that time and bitterly swallowed yet another exasperated sigh. Looks like they were fighting still. Great. Honestly, this guy either needed to start taking anger management classes or he needed to work on his aim. Or maybe both, because this one-sided fight was turning out to be just plain atrocious. It was as if the man wasn't used to his own limbs. Well, at least Naruto could conclude that the latest round of negotiations had failed. Now, what should he try next? Before Naruto could even start to mentally trudge through that particular question, though, he sensed something incoming from his right, and then the world went blank for a second. Only not. The last thing Naruto heard for what felt like a really long time, but could have been a friction of a second for all he knew, was the sound of Kurama cussing. Akino Yamanaka had seen and done and been dragged into a lot of seriously messed up shit in his time. Hands down though, this one took the metaphorical cake. And probably the literal cake too. And all of the other cakes, everywhere, because why not at this point? Not even a second beyond the instant that the foreign jonin had taken that crucial step backwards to avoid another one of Hashirama's angry blows. After the slow progression of Akino's jutsu finally hit home and Akino could feel his consciousness slip from his now empty husk of a physical body to follow the chakra trail his technique had mapped out for him, suddenly, where Akino expected to find some manner of mental representation or mindscape or mind palace or something, there was only darkness. Just nothing. No sights to see, no sounds to hear. There wasn't even a floor to stand on. There was only Akino, floating there, alone in the dark. How odd, Akino had thought, perplexed. Was this some sort of mental defense? A new way to hide the mind and all that it entailed from intruders? Maybe some sort of previously unknown Kekkei Genkai even? Akino couldn't say. He really couldn't say. He couldn't speak. The manifestation of his conscious mind, constructed entirely of his own concentrated Yin chakra, had certainly formed as it was supposed to. Akino could feel himself as a humanoid shape, in a manner that was similar to having a body, only not. Like this he was, unattached, free to move, best suited to slinking about and seeping into the essence of his target, and taking control of everything from within. Only, that wasn't what was happening, because there was nothing for his chakra to grab hold of or sink into, nothing to look at or listen to. Not a thing to smell or touch or taste. Nothing. Empty. Alone. Only, that couldn't be so. Akino's mind-body switch technique, Shintenshin no Jutsu, had hit his target dead on. He knew that. He was here and not rebounding back to his physical body so. Damn it already, there had to be something in here, in the mind of his Hokage's enemy, somewhere. Nobody could be so utterly empty like this. Nobody. Not a monks and sages who mastered the mental arts. Innocent little babies or amnesiacs who couldn't recall their own names. Not even corpses were void of all knowledge, of memories or instincts, or the remnants of vague thoughts and feelings, or something. Only somehow, someway, this guy was. Empty, that is, and then, suddenly, he wasn't. After what felt like several minutes to a mind trapped alone in the dark but could have just as easily been mere fractions of a second in real time, Akino finally began to sense something. Only, it wasn't by any logical or sensory means that Akino, in a startling instant of epiphany, suddenly realized that he wasn't alone in the darkness anymore. Turning blindly towards whatever it was that he could somehow sense looking right at him in the distance, Akino tried to move sluggishly towards it. Without anything solid to grasp onto or even gravity to dictate movement, the resistance in this dark place was odd. Walking, waiting, crawling, wiggling, even trying to swim through the dark gained him nothing. Somehow, intrinsically, Akino knew that while his mental self was somewhat capable of motion in a manner similar to turning his head, or waving his arms about or kicking his legs, he could not move from his present location. He was floating, endlessly, as if left to drift at the bottom of some great body of water. He was also essentially a sitting duck. And the whatever it was in the darkness was getting closer. And as it got closer and closer, Akino started to appreciate what little he could sense about the whatever it was in the dark. Like for one thing, the whatever it was incredibly large. Huge. Monumentally big, even. Mountains would crumble before it, and oceans would churn. Which brought Akino to the pure, unadulterated and distinctly inhuman killing intent this whatever it was exuding from seemingly all over the place. Akino already knew that he couldn't move or speak, couldn't so much as scream, but now he couldn't think either. He couldn't breathe. The only thought running through his mind in those final moments of sheer, unrelenting terror and desperation and get-me-out-of-here-ness, as the whatever it was got closer and closer, and the instinctive knowledge that no ordinary human could stand to so much as exist before this whatever it was and survive intact finally sank in. Repeated over and over and over again in Akino's mind was but one simple question: how am I supposed to get out of this? You don't. The whatever it was in the dark, replied, before the killing intent swallowed Akino Yamanaka whole, and, just as suddenly as he'd arrived, Akino Yamanaka knew no more. Akino came back to himself with a scream that literally tearing itself from his throat. Even to his own ears, The agonized sound he emitted was hoarse and wounded like that of a dying animal. His body similarly jerked and thrashed as he fought his way to full consciousness until suddenly he was wide awake, away from the dark, his heaving torso snapping up to a seated position. Akino sat there for, he didn't even know how long. All he knew was that he needed to breathe, to chase away what he'd felt in the foreign shinobi's mind more than anything he might have seen or heard there. That kind of mindscape was. The psychological implications alone were disturbing, because Akino honestly suspected that he'd manifested in a part of that man's mind that was entirely submerged under a body of water. If he'd been able to find the surface, maybe Akino would have been able to take control of the man's body, or have perhaps even just found some useful information, or he might have found the whatever it was in the dark. A scenario that Akino didn't even want to begin considering, what with his having been expelled from the foreign Jonin's mind by that inhuman killing intent alone. No. Now wasn't the time to psychoanalyze this stranger or pity himself either. So, having ignored the questioning, concerned looks Shikane kept throwing his way and then ignoring the trembling of his own body. Akino may have seen a lot in his life but not, never anything like that. Seriously, what kind of mindscape was that? What the fuck was that thing? And who the fuck was that shinobi? He knew he'd find the answer to none of these questions sitting around on his ass. With barely a steadying hand from the nearby Nara to help him up, Akino got shakily to his feet and immediately set his sights back to the localized war being waged between the Hokage and that, quite frankly, disturbing foreign Jonin. Water release, water colliding wave, Suetun, Suihoha. Hashirama cried out, hands clapped together before him to summon a spiraling vortex of water, which he then proceeded to direct towards his cloaked opponent with minimal gesturing that belied the famous Senju's mastery of the element. What the Akino started to ask, pale blue eyes widening in surprise. Jutsu, they escalated. Was all Shikane said. Yes, I can see that. Akino uttered, now suspiciously eyeing the foreign Jonin as the man nimbly sidestepped the powerful torrents of water being manipulated his way and danced backwards along the damaged roof, no doubt looking for a means of retreat, while Hashirama's technique was still in effect. But my jutsu, Akino muttered in dawning realization. If they were fighting like that now, if they'd been fighting just the same as they had before Akino had tried to intervene, he should have stopped. Akino realized, still speaking more to himself than to Shikane, still watching the foreign Jonin's otherwise unhurried, almost casual movements in blatant disbelief. As if this weren't a fight with the powerful and renowned leader of their village, but a friendly spar. Because the man really should have stopped. Even if Akino hadn't been able to take control, if the Yamanaka had somehow been forcibly removed from the man's mind by that thing hiding amidst that infinite ocean of darkness, the foreign Jonin should have fallen unconscious as soon as the mind-body switch technique, Shintenshin no Jutsu, took effect. His physical body should have stopped moving or fallen to the ground just as Akino's had or something. Even if only for the minute or two of real-world time that it took to fight Akino off or send that thing after him, the man should have stopped. Only, flinched. Cursed a bit too. Shikane dutifully reported, he hadn't, thought your jutsu failed. Was worried when you didn't immediately wake up. Shikane admitted not a moment later, actually expressing how truly troubled she really was by these recent events instead of hiding it under a thin veneer of bored like she usually did. Something is off. She also added. At that last remark, Akino could only nod his agreement. Not just something though. It was everything. Everything about this was bothering Akino. Water release, water severing wave, Suetun, Suedanya. Hashirama suddenly shouted from beyond the torrents still crashing about the rooftop. A stream of high-pressure water cleanly cutting through the obscuring waves of his previous technique and slicing clean through to the next building over in a bid to follow the foreign Jonin's continued retreat. Akino tensed upon seeing several Konoha shinobi in similar positions to Shikane and himself, all of whom were now being forced to abandon the crumbling upper half of what was only a few seconds before a decently priced hotel. This didn't seem to dissuade Hashirama in his current mental and or emotional state though. The Hokage instead released his control over the water he'd called upon previously for his water release. Water colliding wave, Suetun, Suihoha, letting it run uselessly over the edges of the roof and then down the building's walls to land in the streets below with a great heaving splash. Hashirama seemed mindless to the mess, to the damage this caused, his hands already moving to make new hand seals. Another jutsu Akino realized. Akino was just about to step forward to the edge of the roof he was standing on, to start shouting at the other Jonin no doubt present to get anyone ranked Chunin or below away from here. Now, because this wasn't going to end anytime soon and it wasn't likely to go well, when a sudden blur of movement had Akino stopping in his tracks. He'd barely seen the actual sequence of events, distracted as he was in trying to mitigate some of the fallout, but Akino could see the aftermath and draw his own conclusions from there. He could see the way Hashirama's previously vertical body was suddenly horizontal and prone and rocketing backwards off the roof, careening straight over the street below, to where he crumbled finally into the next building over, propelled with enough force to smash straight through solid walls and glass window panes and wooden beams and who knew what else, like it had been nothing. Standing where the Hokage had been, both hands casually buried deep in the pockets hidden in his cloak, one raised foot slowly descending back to rest in a more natural, laid-back stance, was the foreign jonin. Fuck. That guy just kicked the Hokage through a building, didn't he? Akino could see movement from the debris lining the hole in the second building, could see the Hokage standing up again and ripping off the fire shadow hat he'd insisted on at his inauguration to glare coldly at the cloaked foreigner standing calmly, resolutely, so perfectly still on the roof of the first building. There were then a few long moments of pause, in which the foreign jonin, his expression shadowed by the conical hat he still wore, refused to press his advantage and go on the offensive. Instead, he seemed content to just stand there and remain calmly, creepily, absolutely still. Hashirama seemed to notice this and took this as an opportunity to pointedly catch the eyes of just about every shinobi standing poised on the surrounding rooftops, his frown and furrowed brow set forebodingly deep. Then, he shook his head no. No, he did not want or need their help. No, they were not to intervene. Akino and Shikanai received a particularly heated glare and were forced to nod their assent to their Hokage's will, a will Shikanai had mentioned previously but both had ignored, before Hashirama finally turned his attention back to his opponent. His opponent, who was still standing there, unconcerned, so utterly still with his head cocked slightly to the side, as though studying Hashirama intently, or perhaps questioning his sanity. Not that Akino could blame the man. Well, he wouldn't blame him for that at least. Not when everyone else present was doing it, silently questioning their Hokage, questioning what had sparked such a dire and potentially damaging confrontation, and questioning why their Hokage wanted none of them involved. Because Shikanai hadn't been kidding earlier, there was something seriously wrong with what was happening. Only now they couldn't interfere either because orders were orders and that no had definitely been an order. Which wasn't surprising either. Hashirama had never been one to let others fight his battles for him, even if he was in the middle of a nervous breakdown or whatever the fuck this was. That didn't make Akino feel any better about it though. Still, orders were orders and this wasn't the time for complaining. No, from this point onwards this battle would only get more dangerous. The warm-up was over. Evidently, Akino wasn't the only one to think so either. Shikanai was already tense at his side and biting at her bottom lip, her dark brown eyes shrewd and focused and alert. The Chunin were evacuating and the Jonin were backing up to more defensible, less collateral-prone positions. And then, at some unspoken, unseen signal, it began. Hashirama was forming hand seals in a blur of movement, probably would release this time. The foreign Jonin had retrieved one of his hands from his pockets, and idly held at his side. His lower arm was suddenly engulfed in a plume of white smoke. Hashirama leaned forward on the balls of his sandal-clad feet, about to rattle off whatever ninjutsu technique came next when, shit, where the heck did that man get a scythe? In another whirlwind of motion, moving possibly even faster than last time, the foreign Jonin shot forward from his position on the first building's roof and effortlessly leapt across the distance to confront Hashirama in close-quarter combat again. Only, Hashirama was forced to abandon another jutsu attempt so as to dodge yet another damaging slash from the equally as lethal-looking scythe. The Hokage then retrieved a kunai from his person and raised the ninja tool in one hand to block the following swipe. 4 similar maneuvers later, all of which occurred in a matter of seconds with the speeds they were moving, Akino was still left reeling at the foreign Jonin's ability to so effortlessly and bodily move Hashirama with the sheer force of his blows. It turned out not even successfully blocking against the scythe could combat the force of the unnamed man's attacks. Hashirama needed to get some distance. Now, he needed to. Crap. The foreign Jonin just threw his fucking scythe at Hashirama, a decision that somewhat weakened whatever tactical advantage the distance Hashirama had managed to put between them might have afforded the Hokage. Because it was now abundantly clear that the scythe had some sort of cable attached and the foreign shinobi was more than competent at using that to his advantage. If the way the foreigner not only threw his weapon but also artfully manipulated it through the air was anything to go by and now they were both on the original apartment complex roof again, and the foreign Jonin was swinging that scythe around in close quarters again and Hashirama finally managed to get in close again. The Hokage took a hit, a minor wound but a wound nonetheless. only to turn the apparent disadvantage around when he spat a series of thin and pointy senbon-like projectiles at the foreign jonin, striking the latter in the arm and chest and momentarily catching him off guard. The scythe was kicked from a loosened grip and fell not so much with a clatter but a devastating crash, and, holy shit, how heavy is that thing? Akino had barely the time to silently wonder before. Fuck. Now it was the foreign jonin forming hand seals, and of course, Hashirama recognized the first two signs and what they generally signified too, and prepared for something fire-natured. None of them were prepared for. Wait, was that lava? As in an actual fucking floor of lava that caused the very ground beneath their feet to sink as glowing magma seeped up from every discernible crack and crevice in the street below, spewing insurmountable levels of heat that had Akino sweating even from the roof where he was standing, watching, helpless, as the deadly magma devoured everything in its path? Why was the scythe was back and fuck? Now the foreigner was just using plain old elemental manipulation to throw gargantuan streams and pillars of lava at an increasingly desperate Hashirama Senju, just like Hashirama had with the water jutsu earlier, only this time it was lava or magma or whatever the fuck it was called when it wasn't in a volcano, and oh my gods, what the fuck, what the fuck. Of course, that's about when the second Hashirama showed up. So yeah, there was that. Fuck. This really wasn't Akino's day. Chapter 22. Previously. Of course, that's about when the second Hashirama showed up. So yeah, there was that. It was actually a short but no doubt life-threatening encounter with his secretary, Miss Misaki, that inevitably brought Hashirama to perhaps one of the most insane, and no doubt outlandish sights he'd had the displeasure of seeing, ever, in his life. And to think, this day had started out so well too, which, now that Hashirama thought about it, had most likely been a sign of what was to come, and thus probably why everything had ended up going so utterly and abysmally to shit. Case in point, today the Hokage had woken up early from what almost amounted to a peaceful full night's sleep beside his lovely wife, and, after tentatively kissing an adorably half-awake Mito back to sleep and checking on the rest of his happily snoozing family, Hashirama had the time to down a hearty breakfast that didn't include ration bars of any description and leave the Hokage residence at a casual walking pace, still at that time optimistic about the productive and hopefully straightforward day ahead. Hashirama had thus made his way through the peaceful streets of Konoha, his beloved home, to his temporary office in the Hokage Tower. But after hours spent slaving away over his usual paperwork load and redoing that which was lost during the horrors of IT and organizing missions and assigning missions and carefully responding to correspondence from snotty daimyos or twitchy kages and everything else it took to successfully run a village of several thousand civilian citizens and hundreds of shinobi alike, finally, Hashirama's admittedly bipolar luck hit the fan and an enraged Miss Misaki made her dreaded first appearance of the day. Lord Hokage, are you a clone? Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage and leader of the Hidden Leaf Village, a man who had inadvertently shaped the system of their very world and a veteran shinobi of such caliber that most had long since dubbed him the god of shinobi, did not just scream like a little prepubescent girl. Really, he didn't. It's just that Miss Misaki's smooth voice was very stern and to the point, and she hadn't been there just a second ago. She was always sneaking up on him like that, so he shouldn't really be that scared, because he wasn't, he swears, only. Wait, a clone. Face snapping up to meet that of his trusty, terrifying, secretary, Hashirama distinctly did not jump out of his chair in a fit of genuine fright and flinch away like a wounded animal upon catching a glimpse of deadpan, narrow-eyed disapproval behind fragile wire-framed spectacles. He did not tentatively and instinctively take a few careful steps backwards and maybe start hunching his shoulders just a little so as to appear smaller, and thus less of a target. And above all else, he most certainly did not huddle against the nearest vertical surface, a wall in this case, as if to blend in with his surroundings and perhaps miraculously disappear from her line of sight. He didn't. Honestly, well, okay, maybe he did. Just a tiny bit. No, don't judge him. Nobody, and Hashirama meant nobody, was allowed to judge him right now. This was for the sake of the greater good, his continued survival, damn it. Therefore, his behavior was completely acceptable and excusable and nothing to be ashamed of. At all. Really, no matter what anyone else, Madara had always said, it wasn't. This was smart. Not a sign of weakness. Even if when Hashirama next spoke, he did so with great hesitance and caution, just barely managing to choke out a half-whimpered no. I'm real, from around the lump suddenly lodged in his throat. Of course, at this point, he'd like to point out that his present demeanor was entirely due to his trouble processing the necessity of such a question. Because seriously, clones? What was Miss Misaki going to think of next? Hashirama wanted it on the record that he was a rather excellent shinobi and an even more excellent Hokage, the kind who wasn't deathly afraid of his secretary or his wife or his paperwork. Only, unfortunately for some people, but mostly Hashirama, what Hashirama wanted rarely had any semblance or relevance to reality. Or more specifically, by this point in time, everyone and their dog knew what Hashirama was like when it came to his secretary or his wife or his paperwork. And okay, yes, even Hashirama had to admit that he wasn't hesitant for any reason other than that he was trying to. No. There was no trying. He would not provoke the actually quite vicious beast-like predator standing primly before him, posture straight and arms crossed judgingly over her modest chest. He categorically refused, because Miss Misaki was bad to deal with even on a good day. And right now, Miss Misaki was practically frothing at the mouth in a rage by her standards. In fact, seeing her this overly professional was almost an equivalent to how scary his sweet Mito could be in the event she was forced to even remotely deal or associate with stupid. For truly, forget the clan wars or the new volatile tensions mounting amongst the hidden villages even to this day. These were the real nightmares that haunted Hashirama. It was therefore safe to conclude that Hashirama considered himself very smart indeed and actively and perhaps obsessively striving to avoid infuriating the women in his life, and to avoid them at all costs in the unfortunate, and definitely life-threatening event that he did fuck up. It was all for the sake of his continued well-being, and that of the village as well, of course, which brought him back to the present. Miss Misaki wasn't happy, which usually spelt imminent pain and or disaster for Hashirama in one form, i.e. paperwork, or another, i.e. his wife. And the thing that was making Miss Misaki so unhappy had something to do with clones. Hashirama clones, to be precise. And that wasn't a good thing at all, for anyone, i.e. probably Hashirama, who may or may not have been involved. Okay, so definitely Hashirama. Have you made any clones of yourself recently? Miss Misaki asked with deadly precision, her tone sharp and cold and so deeply professional, it sent shivers of dread down Hashirama's spine. Yet it was safe to say that she really wasn't happy. Still, clones though? What did this have to do with NET dash? No? Hashirama compulsively blurted out, still huddled against the wall. Crap, was that a mistake? Had he said the wrong thing? Should he have said yes, even though he hadn't the faintest idea what was happening, and dash? Arg. Why are women so dash? Slowly, achingly slowly, a single perfectly plucked eyebrow raised itself into a perfect arch that enunciated to Hashirama in no uncertain terms that he was well and truly, without a doubt, fucked right now. Oh. Gods. He knew it, crap, he should have said yes, he should have said yes, he should have said yes, he should ha. No, wait, please don't say she already got Mito involved in all this, whatever this was. Oh please, oh please, oh please let it not be S dash. Are you asking or telling me, Lord Hokage? Oh. Shit. He was doomed. Miss Misaki's voice now had that droll, toneless quality that circled and prodded and teased outright sarcasm but never quite made the commitment. It made Hashirama think of the poison laced in a nice home-cooked meal, of smothering via pillows and nasty falls down the stairs and oops, you just accidentally drowned in the bathtub. Crap, because Miss Misaki wasn't someone you fought on a battlefield. No, she was the kind of someone who knew where you slept. Shit, what were they even talking about again? I'm telling you? Hashirama said just a little too hesitantly, only for the second perfectly plucked eyebrow to rise and join its sister. Oh. No! This wasn't a I'm threatening to inform Mito of the situation if this doesn't get sorted out soon scenario at all. Oh gods, this was worse. So much worse. No, this was an actual code. I've already told Mito so you have exactly until she tracks you down to fix it or you die. Good. Miss Misaki said curtly in reply, and the now openly whimpering Hashirama could already tell that none of this was good. At all. Not even a little bit. But seriously, clones? What had happened? What was going on? Why was this happening to Dash? Then perhaps you can explain to me how and or why you're currently instigating an international incident in the middle of the village's southeastern residential district? What? Did she just say? According to reports, an exact replica of yourself is at this very moment publicly trying to commit murder in this village's southeastern residential district. I believe the intended victim has been identified as a foreign Jonin sensei visiting for the exams, hence my decision to classify the situation as an international incident. Were you unaware that these events are currently taking place, Lord Hokage? Miss Misaki told him, because she really wasn't asking. She already knew that he didn't know, only she didn't want to hear that he didn't know. despite her knowing that he knew that she knew that he didn't know, but as Hokage he should know. And crap dash. I know I should probably say that I wasn't, Hashirama uttered very nervously. But, then I suppose, now that you've been informed, you had best start resolving the issue, Lord Hokage. Miss Misaki tooted, and Hashirama could feel himself cowering back and shrinking even further against the wall of his temporary office, no doubt looking fairly foolish as he did so and not at all caring in the least at this point. I suppose I should. Why, go and do that. Hashirama stuttered out, his anxiety only mounting further when Miss Misaki didn't deign to reply this time. Instead, she simply stared at him, the eyebrows of judgment and doom still held arched at optimum levels of simultaneous disapproval and expectation. And you'd best hurry before Mito finds out. Slowly, achingly, Hashirama peeled himself away from the relative security of his wall and inched 3 steps to the right until he was left to stand uselessly in front of the relatively large window situated behind his temporary desk. Miss Misaki watched his every move like a hawk. He refused to turn his back to her. She did not turn to leave. She did not speak, and she did not move, and she did not blink. I'll just be going, Hashirama said, still no outward reaction. No blinking either. Okay. Taking this as the sign to make his escape now or else, Hashirama spun around as fast as was physically possible, and then immediately defenestrated himself headfirst out the thankfully open window. He barely heard a curt "of course, Lord Hokage" echo emptily from behind him as he maneuvered his fall down several stories and tried desperately to put any lingering thought of the dreaded eyebrows of judgment and doom, and all that they entailed, out of his mind. Apparently, he had other things to focus on than his secretary or his wife or the Chunin exams or the damage in his old office or all of the paperwork he had to replace or just outright redo, or even how much he wished, oh so very, very much, that he told the villagers and the clans and the fire daimyo, every single one of them, to shove their Hokage nomination and their popular vote where the sun didn't shine. Maybe then, and only then, Hashirama might have done the smart thing and made all of this, everything, Madara's problem instead, which brought Hashirama to the present, taking in a scene that felt too ridiculous for reality, but was apparently undoubtedly real because it hurt every time Hashirama pinched himself, and releasing the genjutsu every other way he could think of didn't seem to be working at all. But oh, what manner of insanity could Hashirama possibly be referring to? There, right smack bang in the middle of Konoha's ever-expanding residential districts, standing rigid and tense atop what had probably been a fairly nice and affordable 4-story apartment complex just an hour before, complete with an impressively large and even more importantly functioning water dragon curled daringly around the upper half of what remained of the building's near-skeletal structure, where the head of its gargantuan body perched protectively over its wielder, just as Miss Misaki had described him. Standing there was an exact replica of Hashirama Senju. For the real Hashirama, a distinction he never had to make before, primarily because he'd always been under the impression that he was the only Hashirama. Yep, this situation was definitely ridiculous. However, from Hashirama's short-lived perspective, replica Hashirama and his impressive water ninjutsu were only half the picture here. Which actually brought to mind the real question of the day: who was trying to murder who here? Since the answer seemed far more skewed than Miss Misaki had previously implied. This insight was of course born from the simple fact that, despite the potentially damaging ninjutsu replica Hashirama was even now seamlessly maintaining and manipulating around himself in a truly masterful display of power and control, using what appeared to have been traditionally a short-burst offensive technique as an oversized dragon-shaped aquatic shield instead. All of that had nothing on the other guy, the intended victim. Standing actually quite casually on some other nameless half-destroyed building, with an intricate yet lethal-looking black and crimson triple-bladed scythe in one hand, was a figure shadowed in mystery. Where replica Hashirama was rigid and precise, the other guy was odd. Every movement rang strange to Hashirama's senses, though logically the Hokage could pinpoint the way seemingly casual stances and nonsensical flows of motion actually bled into a semi-structured style that was as turbulent and unpredictable and contrary as a maelstrom. The way the man's free hand flicked and weaved through strange half-formed hand signs too would have seemed as ridiculous as his taijutsu to the undiscerning eye, if not for the pillars of actual molten lava that then rose up and quite literally danced to the other guy's every whim. Pillars of lava, which were then either hastily dodged or desperately intercepted by replica Hashirama's slowly shrinking water dragon, whereupon they became rapidly cooled pillars of stone that protruded up and up and up from the streets below, with some large enough to loom over even Konoha's impressive skyline. This was the other guy. The shinobi who, apparently, reportedly, was the one under attack. Pfft. Yeah, right. Hashirama wasn't even going to touch the veritable hows or whys attached to the once solid ground that dominated the streets below, having been at some point turned into a veritable sea of lava. The very same lava that the other guy was drawing upon in his almost nonchalant attempts to douse/incinerate replica Hashirama where he stood. Yeah, no, Hashirama didn't want to know. Instead, Hashirama momentarily dragged his attention away from the fight to study any other witnesses present. Of course, he was quick to note that while several of his shinobi were on the scene, or at least, as close to the scene as they dared venture, none of them were interfering. While seemingly no one had thought to intrude upon this conflict, ideally before the literal sea of lava started being a thing, at least some of Hashirama's subordinates had had the presence of mind to evacuate non-combatants and citizens before everything started going pear-shaped. Unfortunately, what Hashirama also picked up from his shinobi was the shock his sudden appearance had caused in the few who noticed his arrival by this point. This reaction combined with the previous lack of initiative led Hashirama to believe that the shinobi currently witnessing this impromptu in-village emergency were also under the false impression that replica Hashirama was the real Hashirama. Which was bad. Very bad. Because Hashirama didn't need to be told how this situation would look from the outside. It would look exactly how it looked right now. Especially not when there were chunin exams going on with participants from other hidden villages running around and… Wait. Shit, didn't Miss Misaki mention something about a Jonin-sensei? Was the other guy a Jonin-sensei? From another village? Being attacked in the middle of Konoha? As in an actual foreign Jonin-sensei from another village who had an exact replica of Hashirama Senju, him, the Hokage, right now attacking said aforementioned Jonin-sensei from another village in the middle of Konoha? No wonder Miss Misaki was pissed. Right, this had to stop. Now, or an hour ago, maybe yesterday. Whichever was sooner, the better. Because extensive property damage and security concerns aside, this right here was going to be a logistical, financial and political fucking nightmare. And don't even get Hashirama started on the biblical levels of paperwork everything about this little episode was going to generate. EW and Q disgusted shuddering. Already, Hashirama was mentally disassociating with that shit in ways that he knew weren't healthy but didn't give a fuck about right now. Because replica Hashirama and the other guy were still screaming at each other and fighting and the real Hashirama needed to function, damn it. He could hide under his new desk and have his nervous breakdown in the peace of his temporary office later. Having not made any wood clones recently, and never once sentient enough to go rogue on him, Hashirama was thus still relatively certain he was the only Hashirama supposed to be wandering around. For this reason, despite the utter carnage and calamity the other guy was currently just a little too enthusiastically wreaking, the real Hashirama tentatively decided to side with the combatant who wasn't trying to impersonate him in his own village for reasons that were probably nefarious. So, when replica Hashirama just barely managed to dodge the next stream of lava that snaked itself up from the streets below to dance through the air towards its target, when replica Hashirama sacrificed yet another portion of his bizarre water dragon defensive strategy to rapidly douse and solidify the now rapidly cooling lava into one of several precariously distorted pillars of volcanic rock, and replica Hashirama took the chance to dart forward and use that pillar and several others like it to safely traverse the sea of lava below, and immediately engage the other guy in a vicious taijutsu assault upon finally reaching the ladder's roof. The remnants of replica Hashirama's water dragon following doggedly behind him when the water dragon arched up and prepared to commit to a full-force nose dive right on top of the other guy, either hoping to crush the cloaked figure under the pressure or drown him, or maybe perhaps just knock him off the roof they currently stood upon, down into the oozing scorching sea of lava below as, oh no! The sudden unprecedented shift in tactics saw a momentary lull in the other guy's assault and gave replica Hashirama his chance, and now the dragon really was pressing down and diving and, just admit it already. Replica Hashirama was in the midst of screeching, to which the other guy replied with an emphatic fucking admit to what you psychotic bastard dash. Right, probably best to intervene at this point, so, bounding forwards, his own chakra churning and practically aching to burst from inside his coils, the real Hashirama's hands were a blur as he took a page out of the imposter's playbook and used the protruding volcanic stone pillars as a springboard to propel himself forward. Wood release, wood locking wall, mokuton, mokujihiki, Hashirama intoned upon landing right in front of the other guy, his hands slamming down onto the half-shingled roof, chakra immediately bleeding down into the building's wooden interior to bring forth new life. To his left and right, thick wooden support beams swiftly dislodged themselves and emerged from beneath the patchwork of slate tiles, curving forward and curling together just in time to form a solid half-dome-like barrier between Hashirama, the other guy, and the water dragon rapidly bearing down upon them. Hashirama didn't have much time to register the incredible force of replica Hashirama's jutsu colliding with his own, effectively shaking the remnants of the skeleton of a building they all stood upon. Instead, he was just a bit more preoccupied with matters, or more specifically, amused comments, originating behind him. A clone? The other guy's half-hearted interjection wasn't at all what Hashirama had expected. Only a few short minutes ago, that voice had been saturated with the passion and vitriol of battle, frustrated and exasperated and harsh and demanding. And yet, in a switch of emotional gears that left Hashirama feeling odd, personally attacked, suddenly, this man's tone was far too steady and far too calm and by far too nice. Trusting in his makeshift shield to protect them for at least a few more seconds yet, half turning and half looking over his shoulder, Hashirama's immediate impression of the other guy was that this shinobi stood tall, taller than Hashirama's own 6 or so feet in height at least, and hid just about all other features beneath the mysterious veneer of a slightly singed and rugged black cloak and a richly decorated wide-brimmed conical hat. Only the impressive length of his silvery hair was visible beyond his clothing, kept far longer than Hashirama's own less exotic brown, and in a high ponytail that trailed down the length of the man's back to his hips. Other than that, the only other features visible to Hashirama were both what might have been streaks of drying blood smeared down the other guy's cheeks and the almost disturbingly genial smile he could see peeking out from underneath all of those ornamental bells and tassels, as well as the dark shade that conical straw had afforded. In the instant or two it took Hashirama to visually analyze the other guy, the Hokage was also able to draw but a few sparing conclusions. The most compelling of them all though was that while replica Hashirama obviously confused and pissed him off in equal measure, the real Hashirama appeared to be a source of amusement for the other guy. Hashirama could see this in the man's perhaps too pleasant smile, in the way that his previously furious tones, almost bordering on outright derangement towards the end there, had smoothed into something idle and entertained and yet still ever so slightly tinged with the first hints of curiosity, and something darker. Nonetheless, despite the complexity of this man's inner depths, there was no shock, no fear and no awe when he gazed upon Hashirama. Just a casual acceptance of the situation as it was, of Hashirama as he was, and the practicality to roll with it. Hashirama could see it in the slight shift of a stance that would have looked laid back and unguarded to most. The way this man idly sidestepped Hashirama's half-turned form and repositioned himself so that he was behind Hashirama's intact wooden barrier yet also beside Hashirama still. A clone he'd asked but Hashirama saw otherwise. Hashirama could tell that while this man didn't for a second believe Hashirama to be a clone, he wouldn't spurn the Hokage's interference any more than he was going to let his guard down, because a part of Hashirama knew that while his actions were likely appreciated to a certain degree in this instance, the other guy wasn't nearly as invested in this fight as replica Hashirama evidently was and well. No, even on a bad day, the other guy wasn't someone who wanted or needed to be saved. Nodding to himself, Hashirama decided he could respect that. A clone, you ask? Hashirama finally rumbled, perhaps a tad thoughtfully, before completely turning away from the other guy standing right beside him to instead get back to the matter at hand and consider the effects of his own jutsu. It was odd that replica Hashirama hadn't tried to get around it and attack them from behind, above or below yet, but perhaps he was regrouping or preparing a more elaborate ambush. Hashirama couldn't be sure until they left the temporary sanctuary his technique offered them, or he removed the vision-obstructing barrier in its entirety. You know, that isn't the first time I've heard that today. Hashirama continued idly, bemusedly, before, with a choreographed flick of his fingers and a slight pulse of chakra, the wooden pillars of the half-dome encompassing them began to cautiously peel away like the delicate petals of a blooming flower. He decided not to comment on the naked shock that was soon revealed to have overtaken replica Hashirama's stolen features on the other side of the roof, instead adding to the other guy more boisterously impressed, though I have to admit, you appear to have been doing rather well for yourself before I arrived. Tell me, do you know what's going on, Mr. It was here that Hashirama found himself floundering, a new realization suddenly dawning. Resolute, the legendary first Hokage did not stop his perusal of replica Hashirama's gradually shifting expression, not really registering the enraged scowl that was now coming to dominate the impostor's stolen face. This was primarily because the real Hashirama was doing everything in his considerable power to keep himself from even so much as peeking towards the shadowed face of his new comrade by circumstance, thoughts racing furiously for a means of salvation. He didn't know the other guy's name. Hashirama's truly awesome tough guy entrance, and the badass glorious backdrop of a lava-scorched battlefield, all with an easily shared enemy and an audience of several dozen other shinobi all intently watching Hashirama and the other guy from seemingly every angle, anticipation practically saturating the very air that they breathed. And damn it all, but Hashirama didn't know the other guy's name. Everything had come together so beautifully, and they had looked so cool just then, and now, Hashirama had ruined it all. Oh, this was so embarrassing. It's Hidan. The other guy, Hidan, finally offered in that same audibly pleasant tone. Only Hashirama could hear the slight twist in that oh-so-genial butter wouldn't melt in this guy's mouth smile that practically screamed, "I'm laughing so hard at you right now and there's nothing you can do about it." For a second, Hashirama wanted so badly to curl up and sulk, but alas, this wasn't the time. The other guy, Hidan, seemed to agree, if his next utterance was anything to go by, stating in a slightly deeper, darker tone, "And no, I have no clue why any of this is happening. All I know is whoever this is wants me dead for reasons I don't understand and honestly couldn't give two shits about. So, unknown grudges and an inexplicable inability to get the mysterious grudge bearers to stand down without a beat down. Now, that definitely sounds familiar. Fair enough." Hashirama found himself conceding with a sage nod of sympathy. What else could he say? Hashirama couldn't even count how many times over the course of his adult life he'd had to impatiently suffer those ill-fated assassination attempts and the bad monologue ing that more often than not followed. After so many abysmal failures from those before them, he still oftentimes failed to grasp why so many people bothered trying in the first place. Hashirama, a new voice, nearly identical to his own, suddenly echoed across the heavily damaged roof. "He's lying. That man, Hidan, he needs to die," Replica Hashirama was stating so coldly, so seriously that, "Oh, just fuck off already." Hidan interrupted in that same darkly jovial tone, the words accompanied by a soft whoosh of displaced air as this powerful shinobi swung the bladed end of his scythe up in an elegant arcing, until the length of the weapon now rested lazily against his shoulder. As Replica Hashirama ignored Hidan's interjection, still ranting, only now he was ranting at the real Hashirama too. Something about believing him and being right and suspicious shinobi, and tension shifted the silver-haired man's stance at Hashirama's side into something like a predator's crouch, and when the angle of his head tilted just so as Hidan prepared to re-engage Replica Hashirama, a glance at his new companion in that fatal moment gave Hashirama the briefest of glimpses of. It was an intensely purple gaze directed steadily forward at Hashirama's impersonator, or more specifically, the two tear-like marks, each of which trailed from under those vivid violet eyes and down Hidan's cheeks in an ink so darkly red it bordered on black, which caused Hashirama to falter. Those marks. Suddenly, Hidan froze mid-crouch and straightened his posture with a languid roll of his shoulders, the joints popping and cracking loudly as he did so. Wait, why was he suddenly dash? "Yeah, I'm a sage." Hidan deadpanned, now staring directly at Hashirama with his previous smile having faded and gone, and Hashirama wanted to curse loudly. Damn it, he really had to stop saying whatever shit he was thinking when he wasn't paying attention, probably reading the agitation in Hashirama's face. Or maybe just catching the way the Hokage's left eye started to twitch. Hidan suddenly cracked another genial sort of smile. Only not. And suddenly Hashirama saw a whole lot more of the dark in this shinobi than had previously been allowed to surface. Hey, don't look so stressed, Mr. Treehugger-in-Chief. Hidan chimed just a little too good-naturedly, already repositioning his grip on that scythe of his and turning back to face Replica Hashirama, who had yet to actually stop shouting at either of them thus far. "I wouldn't go all out or anything in the middle of your village like that. It's just way easier to throw my lava around when I'm using nature chakra to do the heavy lifting. Didn't ya know?" Hashirama didn't have the chance to comment, either on the admission that this mysterious Hidan knew about Senjutsu, on the implication that Hidan wasn't going all out yet, or, perhaps most importantly, on the fact that he, Hashirama Senju, had just been referred to as a tree-hugger-in-chief, before Hidan had leapt back into the fray against Replica Hashirama. Of course, the imposter was quick to use some such or other water technique again, this time summoning up a wall of water from somewhere, from which jets of high-pressure liquid shot out in an effort to try and keep Hidan at a distance. Definitely a water affinity there, though not a common element for inhabitants of Fire Country. Still rooted in place where he'd initially landed on the roof, Hashirama couldn't help but watch the ensuing conflict and consider all that he had learned so far, and note that despite Replica Hashirama's very serious and enthusiastic efforts to kill him, Hidan still wasn't going his hardest. Not even close, which was probably why Hashirama just couldn't find it in himself to blame Replica Hashirama for trying so hard to put Hidan down at a range, despite the man's obvious delusion. Right now, Hashirama suspected that Hidan was somehow molding nature chakra to boost his strength and reflexes to hindering degrees, particularly in the event that imposter got on the wrong side of that deathly-looking scythe. The way Hidan was using nature chakra though, it wasn't sage mode, or at least, not in the way Hashirama understood the technique. Not that Hashirama understood much of the technicalities anyway, not like what little he'd heard of the great sages of the summoned clans and their absolute mastery of senjutsu secrets. Hashirama had always had a stronger connection to nature than most thanks to his unique Kekkai Genkai, and had been forced by his equally as unique circumstances to figure out for himself how to draw nature energy from the world around him, then mix it with his own chakra. It had taken him literal years of shoddy guesswork, failed experimentation, and unrelenting determination to get it down, so, when Hashirama finally got the hang of it enough to reliably enter his self-made rendition of Sage Mode for longer than a few seconds, it stood to reason that he was both baffled and alarmed by the discovery that, while ever in Sage Mode, Hashirama wasn't able to move at all lest the nature chakra he'd molded unraveled immediately, thus causing the nature energy he'd gathered to dissipate back into the environment from whence it came. Only Hidan obviously wasn't suffering these same issues. Somehow, from what little Hashirama could theorize, apparently, Hidan had found a way to not only safely pull nature energy into himself and combine it with his chakra to form nature chakra, but also stabilize and maintain this delicate balance of energies, even in the heat of battle. Hashirama wasn't yet fully aware of what limits this new method imposed upon its wielder or what prerequisites were required of said wielder. Honestly, Hashirama didn't particularly care. All he could seem to focus on as Hidan half-heartedly dodged yet another high-pressure stream of water that could probably have cut a man in two was the fact that Hidan just dodged an attack. As the man actively enhanced his own physicality, casually flipped over that last water blast, and swung of his scythe here and manipulated another surge of lava with his free arm over there. Hashirama could sense that this mysterious shinobi was channeling only relatively minuscule amounts of nature chakra to bolster his physical capabilities and, as the foreign jonin already so strongly implied, enhance his Kekkai Genkai to a degree which made raw elemental manipulation look easy. More than that though, as the minutes dragged on, Hashirama came to theorize that the man wasn't so much absorbing nature energy and creating nature chakra in real time as Hashirama always had, but had instead created a sort of stockpile of nature chakra prior to the battle and was drawing upon that stockpile to fuel his techniques now. This likely limited the amount of nature chakra Hidan could use before he had to gather more. Only, that didn't seem to be bothering him right now, because Hashirama suspected that Hidan wasn't even using his personal rendition of Sage Mode to the fullest of its abilities, was barely enhancing himself and maybe even struggling a little to keep the technique toned down to a minor output, as evidenced by the occasional ripple around Hidan whenever he moved so strangely sometimes, or rather, when nature chakra tried to seep out and envelop his body entirely as he moved, only for Hidan to forcibly pull it back inside again. Hashirama could barely stand to care about anything else in that moment, because, god damn it, Hidan kept dodging attacks. But he was still channeling nature chakra as he did so, because somehow, someway, Hidan had apparently developed or happened upon or learned a weird alternative version of Sage Mode so that, even while actively using it, Hidan was able to move. Now, what in the hell was Hashirama supposed to do with information like that? Naruto just wanted to scream. Like a hardcore, nobody's listening, this isn't fair and I hate everything kind of scream. And why was that? Well, apparently there were two first Hokages. Only one was a delusional ball of frothing at the mouth anger, and the other had only just minutes ago flipped some sort of internal switch, and went from a weird shade of perplexed, curious, anxious, tired, scared, stressed, angry, confused, anxious, sad to fuck. Naruto didn't even want to know what emotion that tone of feeling was supposed to signify. There wasn't a name for it that Naruto could think of, though it felt something like what determination should have felt like, only not, because determination alone wasn't negative enough for Kurama's selective tastes. Which meant, if this quasi-determination was showing up on their radar, it had to be. He's decided something, which could be kind of good but more than likely very, very bad for us, Kurama suddenly grumbled from within, and Naruto felt himself pause in his admittedly half-hearted assault on the angry Hokage for the full second it took to process that. Decided something dash? Just be on alert. Who knows how those crazy fucking Hokage think? That the Bijou then decided to punctuate its statement with a yawn probably meant that this situation wasn't overly dire, yet. Nonetheless, for once, maybe it'd be better to follow his friend's advice. Just this once, because in the last hour alone, Naruto had been forced to fight Hashirama Senju, only to kick the shit of the poor bastard and be disappointed with what he was seeing from the legendary shinobi, only to then finally realize that he wasn't fighting the actual Hokage, just someone pretending to be him. That the second one had made use of a very familiar technique, supposedly unique to only two people that Naruto knew of, had been more than enough of a hint to Naruto that this was probably another example of Chunin exam-induced bullshit, just a different shade of crap to Shrouded Man 1 and 2 being a thing. Because sure, If there could be two different but separate, and yet visibly similar suspicious shrouded men wandering around with nefarious intentions, then why not throw in two Hashirama Senjus as well? It wasn't like Naruto wasn't used to being dragged kicking and screaming into mind-bending schemes and conspiracies by now. Just look at what happened with Akatsuki for fuck's sake. Now, was Naruto happy about the way this particular confrontation was going? No. Not at all. He'd done everything short of outright murdering the angry not Hokage to get out of this fucking mess. Hell, he'd even been forced to start entering Sage mode not even a minute after Kurama had isolated and dealt with the intrusion that just had to have been an attempt at a Yamanaka body switch. That being the second Naruto finally realized he wasn't dealing with just one potential opponent, regardless of the angry not Hokage's insistence that he be the one to fight Naruto alone for whatever reason. Which was weird again, because if this guy wanted Naruto dead so bad, he should have welcomed all the help he could get. Only he hadn't. Instead, Naruto had finally gathered and molded enough nature chakra to satisfy his needs for the next good little while, provided he used it conservatively. And then, in a moment of pure fucking genius, immediately followed by nearly a full minute spent weighing up the pros and cons and figuring, fuck it, he just kicked the fucking Hokage into a building. What's a little more property damage, right? Naruto managed to somewhat even the playing field with that experimental lava jutsu he'd been working on, accidentally destroying training grounds with, recently, having initially based the idea on what little he could remember of one of Jiraiya's all-time favorite jutsu, Earth Release, Swamp of the Underworld, Doton, Yomi Numa. Naruto's idea of converting the earth beneath him into lava had always had its merits. The idea of using pure elemental manipulation to literally hurl said lava at his opponents had come as more of a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing just today, though Naruto certainly hadn't lied to the real first Hokage either when he mentioned how much easier it was to implement his little amendment to the original jutsu when he was channeling nature chakra into said technique. And why? Oh shit, right, back to whichever drug-laced episode the angry not Hokage finally appeared to be getting to the end of. Why? You. Why? Why aren't you taking this seriously? The angry not Hokage literally screamed in between exhausted lungfuls of air, just as his stupid water wall finally collapsed somewhere behind him, and he started to sort of half stumble forward a step or two. This behavior may or may not have been chakra exhaustion kicking in or the nasty gash Naruto had given him in on his side about 20 minutes earlier kicking up a stink, but honestly, Naruto didn't care, so long as this mess was finally going to stop. Shit was bad enough as it was, he didn't need any more surprises today, thank you very much, because that's what you want. Naruto replied gently with an even smile plastered all over his face, trying desperately not to so viscerally enjoy the full-body shudder that raked the man's visibly exhausted body, his anger bleeding into hate and only intensifying somehow thereafter, despite the man's more than obvious exhaustion otherwise inhibiting him. Of course, this was about when Kurama mentally chimed in something about there being no shame in feeling what he felt, about having to enjoy the little things in life and how Senjus were almost Uchihas, in a way, and maybe they could. Yeah, no, Naruto wasn't going down that road again. Nua. No way. You dash. Actually, I'd like to know why too. The voice of the real first Hokage finally piped up and Naruto could hear the man's measured footsteps as he casually sidestepped the heavy damage the building beneath them had sustained and continued his approach. Yeah, so, regarding the real Hashirama Senju, what a great help he'd been this entire time. Not risking a glance over his shoulder, his senses still very firmly focused on the delusional not Hokage lest the imposter took the chance for another surprise attack. Naruto wasn't sure what to make of the real first Hokage, Hashirama Senju's. Suddenly all too serious his expression. What? Naruto uttered tonelessly, his smile intact through sheer fucking force of will by this point. Hashirama dash. The angry not Hokage shrieked, but neither Naruto nor the aforementioned Hashirama gave the interruption any mind. Really? Oh well, if you really must know. Naruto began. Already told you, don't listen T-dash, I'm trying to avoid paperwork. What? The angry not Hokage suddenly choked out at an actual normal volume for once, sounding hoarse and so very confused for a second. His abject confusion was mirrored in the way the real first Hokage's face suddenly screwed up, only there was also a flash of understanding, and dread, and pity, there in the second first Hokage's softening brown eyes that, even without the earlier display of the man's Kekkei Genkai, made it pretty damn obvious which of these two had actual experience as a Kage. Okay, Naruto said in a huff, lowering his scythe and angling his body so that he was standing adjacent to both of these visibly identical but emotionally opposite men. Let's say I wipe the floor with Princess over here with him looking all you. So then let's say word gets around that I was seen beating up or, gods forbid, even killing the fucking Hokage. At that point, it doesn't matter if it's real or not, who started it or how it ended. I mean, do you have any idea how much shit that old bastard Kamizuki is going to give me as is? No? Well, as it stands, I'll probably be doing D ranks until my students' fucking grandchildren are dead. Oh, you've got to be kidding him. No! Naruto hissed at the angry not Hokage with a snarl that no doubt looked feral on the visible parts of his face, particularly as he'd yet to use or otherwise let go of the last of his nature chakra reserves, so there were still twin tear trail-like marks lining his cheeks. Those marks, which usually only accented the edges of his eyes when he used Sage Mode but tended to extend when he messed around with the portioning or output of his chakra, also gave his appearance an almost animal quality, like an Inuzuka, at times. No, Naruto said again, far quieter and calmer, though he had yet to regain his signature smile, because this shit was actually serious. I don't know what your problem is with me, but Princess, I swear, by all that you hold near and dear to your heart, if that cagey old bastard of a Hokage tries to shirk his paperwork on me again because of this, I am coming back here and I am ending you. Got it? That's it? The angry not Hokage asked, still shaking at this point, both with his anger and exhaustion alike. That's it? Naruto parroted back, head tilting to the side as he more singularly considered the not Hokage. That's all you have to say for yourself? You don't know why I did all this? Why I attacked you? Why you need to die? And you say you could have killed me already but didn't, only because you don't want to fill out the paperwork? That's it, the angry not Hokage uttered tonelessly, and Naruto found himself blinking almost oldishly at the man, because, well, when he put it like that, yes, okay. The angry not Hokage said, suddenly very still and certainly sounding very, very calm, even though Naruto knew for a fact that he most certainly was not. Okay? The real first Hokage queried, but there wasn't much of a discernible reaction from the not Hokage beyond that point, except for when he, summoning, impure world Rainkar, adamant and sealing chains, Kongo Fusa,